The lot itself was a little under an acre, with two-thirds of that devoted to parking. If a prime lot had been available, the bunker would have been situated so that patrons left their turn signals on from highway ramp to parking lot. As it was, a driver going east had to pass through a traffic light and a westbound driver had to exit and circle underneath Loop 820. There had been talk of installing a U-turn lane, but only the liquor store and the topless bar would have benefited. Neither one exactly held sway with the Texas Department of Transportation. Empty fields bordered the lot to the east and the south, and an awkward location assured that this land would stay empty for at least the next 3 or 4 real estate booms. For security, a hurricane fence bordered the emptiness, not that an obsessed fan or an angry husband would have been impeded. The second line of deterrence was one set of security lights focused on the fields and another on the parking lot. As a final measure, Spanish bayonet was planted inside the fence. Tall as a man, each wore dozens of needle-pointed 2-foot-long spikes, no point ending more than 8 inches from the next. After the installation along the fence, there must have been a few left over because the same plants were scattered along the edge of the parking lot and between the sidewalk and the street. Anyone who'd thought it out recognized the combination of deadly plants and drunks had lawsuit written all over it. So far, there had only been a few ripped shirts and pants, but as Mother used to say about sticks, someday somebody was going to put an eye out. Unlike the Dallas men's clubs intent on mimicking antebellum plantation houses or an 1880s San Francisco opera house, the bunker was constructed of prefab concrete walls without benefit of windows. If the owners had had their way, there would have been only a single means to enter and leave. Fire codes being what they were, 3 doors were in place. The battleship gray steel doors on the side and the back bore no handles on the outside. The front door was steel too, but was finished as faux wood. A tasteful, almost subtle green neon over the front door announced that the bunker was, in point of fact, a cabaret, which is a polite way of saying topless bar, which itself is a polite way of saying titty bar. And if one were naive enough to think cabaret was the place where Joel Grey sang naughty, cynical songs while dressed in white tie and tails, a brass plaque announced that the bunker was a sexually oriented business, that customers under 21 were not allowed, and God forbid there was a likelihood of nudity. It didn't mention that the nudity was less than one would find on any topless beach. Opening the front door, the patron found the essentials of life, perhaps in order of importance. First was a cigarette machine. Second was an ATM. Third was the cashier, ready to accept a 20 for a $5 cover, returning the patron 10 ones and a 5 as change. Opposite the cashier was a velvet curtain, and on the other side of it, the beer tub. When the pretty girl next to the tub asked you wanted a beer, it was hard to resist, even at $5 a pop, especially when she smiled as though she'd been waiting all night just for you. And even more especially if she called you darlin' in a Texas drawl that stretched darlin' all the way to the Oklahoma border. Even if every patron was somebody's darlin', only a quarter of the entrants tipped the beer tub girl. Something about paying $30 for a $4 six-pack made a man stingy, but the quarter that tipped almost always gave her a buck. A few feet west of the beer tub was a coin-operated pool table, 4 quarters for a game with balls too small, on a table not long enough on felt that looked to be half pills, bumpers that didn't bounce true, and slate too close to the ground for anyone but a 6-year-old. With all that being true, the table was a joy compared to the cues. Another few feet west of the pool table was a shoeshine chair, above it all like a throne amidst the chairs and tables. About the only one who ever sat in that chair was Dougie, the floor manager. It was easier to scan the room from that perch. Along that whole wall was a line of mirrors not more than 2 feet tall, cheat mirrors because pool balls occasionally flew and cues were sometimes swung in anger, which was at least part of the reason why the sticks were in worse shape than the table. If there were a color scheme inside the bunker, gray would have been it. Though there were painted plaster cow skulls and a framed state flag as decorations, they just accentuated the gray fabric on the walls. The floors were medium gray carpet tiles glued onto bare gray concrete. The tables were covered in gray foam marble formica, and the castered chairs with armrests were upholstered in gray plastic. In the full light of day, it would have been monotonous and depressing, but without the benefit of windows, the light of day would only enter the bunker if a tornado pulled off the roof. In the pulsing artificial and colored lights, the grays had a soft effect. As an added benefit, they camouflaged beer stains without even trying. The muting effect of the grays brought out the wood, the brass, and the mirrors.
Stage 2 and 3 were in the middle of the floor. Their poles were brass-plated and also served as structural elements holding up the roof. The stages were elevated about 1.5 feet, and great carpet climbed up the sides, lending the impression of enormous scratching posts. Each stage was about 5 feet across. Stage 4 was tucked into the corner with the wall shared between the vestibule and the main room. It was the smallest of the stages, but made up for it with full-length mirrors. Most dancers didn't like Stage 4. By the time a dancer reached that station, the customers didn't hardly pay attention. It seemed a girl couldn't turn around without kicking a mirror or knocking over a beer. By the time they reached 4, the dancer was ready to pee, to redo her makeup, to smoke a cigarette, and to get off her feet. Main stage covered about half the south wall of the main room. Mirrors ran from floor to ceiling except for the 3x2 cutout into the DJ's alcove. Brass poles marked stage left and right. Some dancers would climb the poles and touch the roof with their high heels. Bare rafters and the light tracks made that a dangerous proposition. The pole climbers were always saluted for their effort, and in a completely different way saluted by the guys when any kind of cleavage defied gravity, in some cases threatening to smother the possessor of said cleavage. The bar was the only place where light was more or less constant and more or less adequate, backed to by mirrors. While low lights might be useful for dancers wanting to make a buck, it didn't help a bartender find the right bottle or charge the right tab. The doors might open at noon, but there was hardly a point. The bunker was too far from downtown for the businessman's lunch, and even a winter sun was too bright, beating down on anyone coming out like God's own searchlight. But it was enough for one bartender, a waitress, and 3 or 4 dancers. Early afternoon was a time for truckers that couldn't sleep in daylight, cops, night shifters, and all other kinds that wouldn't or couldn't be seen at night. It was a time for regulars, but the kind that would nurse a single beer for 2 hours, the kind that left the waitress a quarter tip from that $4.75 beer, the kind that counted 10 or 15 ones as though they were 50s, the kind that knew exactly how many dollars they'd tip the dancers, not just in total, but each individually. Business in the bunker could be charted like the tides. In daylight, only main stage was open. The half-dozen men didn't crowd the tables closest, but were distributed like shotgun pellets. 1 in the corner, 1 near the big screen, 2 between the main stage and stage 3, and another at the bar. The pattern wasn't always the same, a different table, a different guy, but it always looked the same. If there was a new girl, this was when she auditioned. If she was really good, the room sizzled for those 6 or 7 minutes, 1 song clothed, 1 song topless. If she was brand new to dancing, it might be her first and last time on stage. Even in an ice-cold business, there wasn't much point in turning a young girl not up to it into Friday night cannon fodder. Even on a slow afternoon, all the tryouts were chemically fortified, and more than one was so nervous as to be physically ill, and more than one right there on stage. At 2, more or less, the Bud truck parked at the side door and unloaded. The delivery shattered the artificial darkness. No kegs, there was nothing on tap, no cans, just bottles. Anywhere from 500 to 1,000 bottles depending on the night of the week. Max, a man shorter than his hand truck and not nearly as sturdy, wheeled stacks of cases through the propped-open door. Max tipped his gimme cap to the ladies each time he entered and each time he left. He often bowed slightly, and he always left $1 for each of the dancers, but never slid the bill into tea-back or garter. After the 5 or 10 minute disruption, the darkness was again complete, only broken if a dancer opened the back door for a breath of fresh air. With a cigarette haze that never seemed to clear, that shaft of light always looked like heaven beckoning, and with the dressing room at the end of the hall, for some men it was exactly that. The day bartender was like the setup man on a baseball team. He counted the shot glasses, discarding the chipped and cracked, the same for wine glasses, tumblers, and the occasional champagne flute. The levels of the bottles behind the bar are checked, and beer cases are counted, those just delivered and those in storage, all in preparation for the evening's closer. Once 5 or 5:30 rolled around, the afternoon regulars were replaced by the after-work regulars. This was the neap tide, not quite enough to be a high tide. These were the day shift workers, more generous than the afternoon crowd, mostly because they'd had more to drink. And a new shift of dancers filled the floor to greet them, as many as 10 or 15 most weeknights, maybe 20 for Friday night. In weeks from Halloween to New Year's, there might be 25 or 30 on a weeknight, submarines rising to make a few bucks for the holidays. These were the weeks that dancers cultivated their regular customers rather than try to hawk their company in a room where women might outnumber men. It was during these weeks that many men were convinced that a dancer had fallen for them. The house mom arrives before the night shift dancers, and like mothers everywhere, she is the least appreciated person in the club. A good mom knows things about her charges they don't know about themselves, just like their own moms. Most of the dancers arrived by 7 because there was a $30 bonus for being on time, and for some that might be a big chunk of their tips. More waitresses descend at 7, oftentimes too many waitresses, 8 or maybe 10, even as many as 13, to cover a room only big enough for 4 busy women, 6 or 8 during a shot special. On a weekend night, there might be 3 or 4 men in tuxedos, each with manager in their title. They wore earpieces like the Secret Service, not for clandestine communication so much as because the music was so loud a sober man couldn't hear himself think.
A wise manager has skin as thick as an alligator. Dancers call them names when they're caught being a little too friendly. Owners call them names when the dollars don't add up. Customers call them names when 2 o'clock rolls around, when it's time to throw out a drunk, or when it's time to cut somebody off. And on top of all that, they get to break up fights. Fights between girls, between guys and girls, and between guys. Ask any of them. They hate breaking up girl fights most of all. Some managers wear a cup under their cummerbund.
The sun was going down by the time she knocked on the fire exit. Not a secret knock, but a quick light rap, like a woodpecker with his beak wrapped in gauze. She'd started a second knock just as the door cracked open, and she took a step back. "Hey!" It was a long step from asphalt into the dressing room, but she didn't even touch the carpet at the end of the hall. "Hey, yourself." She didn't remove her sunglasses until her bag sat on the long bench. She used both hands to pull the spring-loaded hooks off her lobes, otherwise they left hard-to-explain scratches. "See this?" One of the newer girls pulled glasses off her nose, holding the bridge. "Easy." Ray-Bans and shooter's earpieces, Daddy swore by 'em. "He one of those gun nuts?" She was about to call her a name, but she had already started to ease into Kitty's persona. Kitty was too old for bitch fights. "No," she answered, and she didn't offer anything more. The house mom told her she'd never make it to the floor in time. "Sure I will. About 15 seconds for the outfit, a minute for lipstick, and I'll wear my Catwoman shades until I get a chance to do my eyes." Mom shrugged and told Kitty she was probably right. "Tick-tock, girls." She tapped her wrist for the girls crowding the makeup tables. Kitty was right. It took longer to kick the canvas flats off her feet than it did to strip to nothing and slide into a tea-back and a cling knit that was little more than an extended tube top. A little powder, a too red lipstick, a damn near black outline, and she could pull the navy blue scrunchie from her hair, run her fingers a few times through her waves, a hair toss here or there, and she was just about ready. Shoes. She spat the word like a curse. Kitty called for Mom and held up a leopard-spotted boot in one hand and a pair of heels in the other. They would have been fuck-me pumps, except that the sole was a platform and the heel was more like a railroad spike than an ice pick. "The boots kinda go with the dress," Mom said, "but you show off your calves with the heels." Boots, it is. It took Kitty a long 2 minutes to lace the boots around each leg. Who am I after? Mom ran her index finger down the clipboard. Sierra. Shit. She didn't curse as loud as she wanted to. Sierra's plastic surgeon had never used his scalpel like an artist's brush. In her practice and in practice, he made up for his deficiencies with volume. Volume regarding the number of patients and regarding the silicone he was willing to pack into a breast. For $6,000, he'd create a pair that Coast Guard would certify as a flotation device. Her nipples might look like pennies taped to watermelons, and they wouldn't end up at the same height or distance off center, but most of the guys, especially the drunks, didn't seem to notice or care. They were a business investment and had been deducted in the previous tax year as capital expenditures. Kitty sometimes wondered at what rate they depreciated. Following Sierra was a shitty night on stage. Kitty's small side of B's couldn't beat that pair. Not enough guys noticed a few hundred daily crunches and endless stair steps. "Oh well," Kitty told herself, "the stage never did more than cover my cigs." Kitty grabbed her just-opened pack of menthol lights and a throwaway lighter before she tossed her gym bag into a locker. Hey Mom, could you keep an eye on the lockers? Some bitch got into my bag last week, got like $50 and took 2 of my best outfits. You ain't the only one, Mom nodded. Shoo! Kitty had to run, but was on the floor at the stroke of 7. She headed for the bar, scanning the crowd. She saw none of her regulars, but gave a little wave to Manhattan on stage 3. The strawberry blonde rolled her eyes while she ground her little ass for a guy still in his suit jacket. His tie knotted and loosened not a whit. Manhattan made a motion for Kitty to come over. She hadn't had a drink yet, but Kitty sauntered toward her friend with strides that paused only long enough to pull a starter buck from her garter. New and crisp, the bill stood erect without benefit of folds. She dipped her head to look over the tops of her glasses, even the smallest movement exaggerated to draw attention. Like her namesake, she slid onto stage 3, curling around Manhattan's legs as the suit got his dollar's worth. What transpired between the two dancers could have been the main attraction on late-night pay-per-view. There was almost kissing, almost fondling, a little disrobing on Kitty's part, all more or less on the right side of the legal line in the sand. Even before the call cats from the sparse crowd, the DJ was compelled to comment, and his comment implied that it was the kind of thing that happened in the DJ booth every night. A trained ear would have found the dancers' conversation not to be the heavy-breathed stuff 90% of the guys would remember while they eased drunkenly into the arms of Morpheus. Any action so far? Kitty almost had to yell from her station close to Manhattan's butt. Not much, but the suit is already andied up about $10. He was already good for a dance. I bet we can sell him a sandwich. Kitty did the math while she curled her leg around Manhattan's shorter one. A round of $7 shots, a minimum of chit-chat, and $20 apiece for maybe 10 minutes. 30 each if he went for the couches. How much longer have you got? About half a song if Butt Munch gets her ass out here quick. You in? In. Kitty slapped Manhattan's ass with a cupped hand that sounded like Hell's own fury, but whose touch wouldn't wake a baby. She slid the dollar into the back of Manhattan's teaback. Good. She returned the faux spank. If you want to string this out a little bit, my dress is over there. Kitty picked up the tomato red rayon number and used it as a boa, first around her neck, then waist, then wrapping the other dancer while the crowd whistled and clapped, the song and the show over. Kitty and Manhattan shared a cigarette while the next dancer started the clothed song of her two on main stage. Christ, I hate menthol. For effect, Manhattan wrapped an arm around Kitty's neck. Think he can get him to go for 2 songs? Probably. They both saw the dancer Manhattan called Butt Munch walking up the hall, dress held over her chest for the sake of modesty. He's drinking heinies and I smelled tequilas coming out in his sweat. Enough money to drink $7 beers instead of the regular 5 and drunk on top of that. And in her experience, guys drunk on tequila were the first to buy a personal dance and the last to say that the dance was over. They both saluted the dancer mounting stage 2, and they held hands while Manhattan dismounted stage 3. The finale of the show was when Kitty slid the dress over her tiny friend, ending with a peck on the cheek. The dancer on main stage glared as though they'd stolen their act. Kitty smoothed the fabric over Manhattan's rump before they pulled chairs at the suit's table. This is Kitty. She looked at her as though it was the first picture in a Penthouse not quite show anything lesbian series. Hello. She held out her hand, voice as thick as honey. His eyes jerked from one woman to the other. Would you like something to drink? He needn't have looked for a waitress. They circled dancers like vultures over a pride of lions, and for the same reason. The dancers might take the largest part of the kill, but the waitresses were next in line to help themselves to the carcass, leaving scraps and offal for the shoe shine, the bathroom attendant, and the parking valet. Tequila, he said to the waitress at his shoulder. Ladies? The same, Manhattan said. Goldschlager. Kitty batted her eyes, the effect dampened by the Catwoman glasses. But don't get it from Jackie. Get it from Don. The waitress rolled her eyes. I know. Chilled. Did you like our dance? Manhattan ran nail tips along Kitty's forearm. It was all she could do to keep a straight face. He couldn't even answer, only nod. A quick nod was followed by what might have been a shiver. A couple of shots were all it took for the suit to suggest a dance. He might have been intending a table dance with one then the other, but Kitty whispered that she hadn't danced with Manhattan in so long. That was all it took. Manhattan pulled him by the tie and Kitty steered him with her hands on his hips. Between the two of them, the drunk suit reached the couches. He sank into the leather in bleary-eyed appreciation while Kitty pulled the dress off Manhattan and she returned the favor. Kitty tried to match her moves in rhythm to complement Manhattan's lead, but it really didn't make much difference. The suit's eyes jerked and rolled so much that Kitty knew he was seeing at least 4 dancers in front of him, and maybe half a dozen. But that too turned out to be a blessing. When the suit reached a hand toward a breast, he couldn't decide which one, and that gave each dancer time to gently take his hand before it landed on her wingman. As the first song glided into the second, the dancers found a happy median and even gained an audience when one head then another poked over the brass rail atop the low wall separating the couches. Kitty found time to smile and wink before the blushing faces dropped, but more than one smiled back at her, at Manhattan, or both. The second song faded and 2 women dressed only in teabacks and boots dropped to either side of the suit. They giggled to each other while he fished 20 after 20 from his wallet. Their moment was conveniently shattered when the DJ called Kitty to the booth for a sound check. "Thank you," she whispered while he slid 3 bills into her garter. "My pleasure," he answered. "No," Kitty kissed him on the cheek. "Our pleasure." Then she rolled across the suit, kissed Manhattan on the lips, and rolled off them and toward the dressing room, her dress in one hand.
Manhattan and the suit were already off the couch when Kitty stepped into the DJ's alcove. He asked if she had a preference. "I always have a preference," she answered. "Does one of them have to be country?" He looked down his list. 1, 2, 3. I'll cut you a break. Only one of your 2 has to be country. You pick which. How magnanimous. How about South's Gonna Do It Again for first song and Her Strut from Seeger for number 2? Excellent choices, though I'd hardly call that Charlie Daniels number country. "Son," she said, "any song talking about the South is country. God bless George Wallace." "Who?" Kitty started to explain but stopped herself. "I'm surrounded by children. How many minutes have I got?" "Clock says 5, but there are big tits in front of you, so I'll probably have to do an extra minute or 2 before she comes off stage." Kitty agreed with his reasoning. She headed toward the dressing room. Mom handed Kitty her makeup kit as her foot came off the step. "I bet Sierra doesn't at this kind of service." "Sierra doesn't tip but the minimum," Mom said. "You tip like you've done the job before." Kitty laughed while she told Mom that she'd seen the job and she didn't want it. "You'd make a good mom. In a few years, of course." While Kitty applied an almost plum eyeshadow, she told Mom that her knees couldn't take much more dancing. Too many years in too tall heels. "You've got 5 more years if you want 'em. It ain't like you're sagging." "I've already got 11 years at this job. My tips are trailing off. Another 2 years, maybe?" It was time for mascara. Not much, because she'd been blessed with lashes that would make Elsie jealous. "You could be Mom a couple days a week before then." "I was going to talk to the big boss about it next time I see him. Maybe start out at one of his other bars. The girls here know me already. Hell, maybe I'll just waitress." "Door girl?" Kitty shook her head. "We both know that goes to whoever JJ is dating." "Yeah, I guess I knew that." Kitty heard the cheering and knew that Sierra must have reappeared topless, time enough to bum a cigarette or change from boots to heels. Kitty chose footwear. She'd been smoking too much lately.
Because it didn't seem anyone else was paying attention, Kitty played to Josh, the bathroom attendant. When he hovered at the edge of Maine, that meant there wasn't anyone in the bathroom. A rare occurrence in a room with 15 guys, even when beer went for $5 a pop. In a bathroom consisting of 2 sinks, 2 urinals, and 1 commode, there wasn't that much that needed attending, but the house took a percentage of his tips, rare though they were. Of course, he didn't do much that deserved a tip, generally only handing a patron a few paper towels. Perhaps 1 man in 5 tipped. The others probably didn't wash their hands. Even so, it wasn't a bad profit margin. $1 for half a dozen paper towels? Outside of the lucrative paper towel concession, there were the cigars. Freud would certainly have said something about men buying cigars while surrounded by half-naked women. The House said that the profit margin was nearly 200%. Not the 500% margin as on beer, but nothing to scoff at, especially when the 18 to 25 crowd thought a $20 cigar made them look sophisticated, though they wore gimme caps and hockey jerseys while they husbanded the $40 they could afford to spend over the course of the evening. "How's things?" Kitty swung around the brass pole, body straight, arm extended, and her feet braced on the base. "Just fucking peachy." Josh had the look about him of a high school offensive lineman, but one that hadn't seen the inside of a gym for a few years, which was exactly the case. He was at an awkward age for a male employee of a topless club, old enough to buy beer, but too young to know the score. Kitty almost told him that profanity didn't make him appear older, but she'd noticed over the years that males at that awkward age swore, females too, probably because they didn't know any better words to replace profanity. Kitty also didn't say anything because she didn't want to sound like her own mother. "It'll pick up. It's early yet." She panned the room for likely ganses and didn't hear Josh's response, but was sure some variation of fuck made up the bulk of it. The profanity wouldn't have been so tedious if there were at least some diversity. In the hierarchy of male employees, the bathroom attendant ranked about the same as the parking valet, perhaps a little higher because he worked inside, even if his office was a toilet. But again, Josh didn't know the score. He knew that his friends were in community college or wore paper hats at their jobs. Because he worked at a titty bar, he was king. Josh followed a limping cowboy on the way to the restroom. Not that the cowboy would be good for a tip, but because Josh needed to make sure he didn't steal any cigars. Kitty spun around slowly to stage left. Even the heels felt like stilts. During each of her slow fouettes, Kitty tried to make eye contact with a different guy, her eyes locking for half the spin before her head snapped around to pick a different table. With enough of a buzz, that was sometimes enough to draw a customer to the stage. But it was early, and she wasn't yet topless, so it didn't work. Besides, she thought there was only one guy she knew could both recognize and name a fouette. And, in point of fact, he did whenever he saw one. But if the professor was coming in, it wouldn't be for at least an hour. "Screw it," she whispered, and sauntered back toward the pass-through to the DJ's alcove, pausing long enough to stand behind the curtain, wrapping herself in the sheerness like a dressing gown. Slow night. She didn't have to yell. The DJ's booth was often the quietest spot in the house. "It's early," the DJ added, just a little more filling battle bass to the Knicks. "Green doesn't look very good in a beard." She knew her feet were moving of their own accord, adding a muscle ripple that rode up to her buttocks. "That blue the last time was kind of neat." "It's the light." He stroked the dyed hair on his chin. He had shaved the rest of his head, and his eyebrows were only starting to grow back. "Not good green in here, but it's really mint." Kitty nodded while she looked over her shoulder to be sure there wasn't any traffic in front of the stage. Out of the corner of her eye, she found a thin man in thick glasses next to the stage. Kitty hadn't seen him before, but he held $2, folded in half and spread like a poker hand. She smiled without parting her lips and made bedroom eyes while she strode toward him, her movements leisurely and slow, when she slid her chest down the pole, a slight friction lifting her top until the curve of her breasts peeked out. The 40-ish man looked embarrassed while he slid the $2 into her garter. Kitty brushed close enough to his head that she could actually feel the heat. "Thank you," she kissed his cheek. She rose slowly, with her back against the pole, feet apart until she stood straight. Kitty turned once around the pole and made deliberate steps toward the curtain, left foot crossing over the center line of her stride, then the right doing the same, stretching and accentuating the calves, thighs, and buttocks until the curtain was behind her. "$2 frickin' bucks," she told the DJ while she slid her dress over her head, with care not to catch her earrings in the net. "It's early." "Too early after Sierra," she said. "They can stick anybody that comes in late after her." You forget who else comes in late. Shit. The more late they were, the bigger the tits. It was such an axiom of the business, it could be written in Latin across their letterhead. Science can't tell us what would happen if you put that much silicone so close together. It could well mean the end of civilization as we know it. The DJ told her that sometimes he didn't know what the hell she was talking about. No shit, Kitty whispered while the DJ went into his spiel announcing her return to Maine. Ladies, it's 2-1-1. 2 songs on Maine, 1 clothed, 1 topless, then a song on stage 2 before moving on to stage 3. Kitty tried to mount the stage like Venus rising from the sea spray, but even the professor probably couldn't have guessed that was what she was doing. She tried to find the thin guy with the glasses. 2 more bucks was 2 more bucks. Manhattan led the suit to the stage, $1 in her hand, a 5 in his. Kitty gave them $6 worth of butt grinding, tit shaking, and nipple pinching. The suit gave his bill to Manhattan. Just as well, he was so drunk he'd only be able to reach her garter by starting at her ankle and sliding his hand all the way up her leg. Even then, he'd probably trip over garter and teaback on his way toward her breasts. He should have been cut off 2 rounds ago, Kitty spoke into Manhattan's ear. We're on our way to the couches. Then he's going home. Kitty almost called her a name for not finagling an invite for her, but Manhattan's original invitation netted Kitty $60 before her first hour, and shots she didn't have to pay for. Kitty batted her eyes and made pouty lips at the suit before she thanked Manhattan for letting her share the ride. You earned it, she pointed at the opposite ends of the stage. The thin guy with the glasses stood stage right. A barrel-chested 6'5"er, Kitty guessed to be a cop, stood stage left. She made for the thin guy first. He'd slipped her a buck before she had removed her top. The big guy copped a feel while he clumsily slid his dollar into her teaback. But she was pretty sure it was a practiced clumsy. Kitty slipped off main stage and picked up her dress as she passed the DJ's alcove. She stopped at the end of the hall. The beginning strains of I'll Melt With You announced Valentine onto the main stage. That bitch! She spat. She took my song, she said before anyone in the dressing room asked for an explanation. I always save that for later. Kitty remembered a junior high dance where she had received her first kiss. It was only a peck and wasn't to modern English, but it was one of the few she was allowed to play from the time when she had first started to notice music. She tossed her dress toward her bag. It'll pick up, Mom said. It's early. They'll let you play it again. I didn't want to be mollified while I took a few quick puffs before I was due on 2. I'm still not sure about the heels. Mom told her again that she had the legs for it. Further, she didn't think Kitty needed those big-ass platforms either. Her legs were long enough as it was. Kitty was paying more attention to the smoke settling her nerves as it settled in her lungs. She even pictured it like morning mist, gliding into the nooks and crevices. I'll be back. She stabbed out the cig, holding the smoke in like it was dope. She didn't exhale until halfway up the hall, blowing over her shoulder like an old-fashioned steam locomotive. She couldn't use the long strides as on stage, too many obstacles like customers, waitresses, and tables. Her walk was casual but quick, without forearms or palms over her breasts, nor any false modesty. Sierra helped her onto the 3-foot radius stage. Kitty was a little surprised the lean didn't push Sierra past her center of gravity. But then Kitty reminded herself, apparently she thought the augmented breasts were an excuse for her butt to grow to match. While she helped Sierra off the stage, Kitty reminded herself not to be so catty. She tried to dance as though she were playful instead of angry, and she pulled off the ruse well enough to fool most of them. Besides return trips for the thin guy with the glasses, Kitty gained half a dozen admirers while on the second stage. 3 of them tipped multiple dollars. 1 of them mentioned the show with Manhattan and tipped 3. When Dale came to stage 3. When the thin guy with the glasses followed her to stage 3, Kitty found out his name was Dale. I need to go back to the dressing room for a minute after this, but I'll be back.
Dale nodded with a kind of enthusiasm that indicated she'd made his night.
Kitty had 3 more tippers after Dale, another return from 2, and the big guy from main stage. She noted where each was sitting, just in case Dale wasn't in the mood to buy a dance or two. When the reserved placard was placed on the table between stage 4 and the big screen, the mood of the dancers brightened, as in turn did the mood of the patrons. When that table was reserved, it meant the professor would be in. And even if she would never admit it, Kitty brightened too, as evidenced by the spiral she made down 3's brass pole. And it wasn't as though she'd ever made a bundle off the professor. He'd never been one for a lot of dances. A long line of kings had held court at the bunker. Their stacks of 20s came from many sources: the saved pay of an airman too long in Bosnia, the exercise of stock options, the hard-earned sales bonus, the overlarge tax refund, the 401k distribution, the salary of an athlete, and the winnings of lawsuits and lotteries. But theirs were not courts in the manner of the Sun King, but more the harems of a Bedouin prince, full with fawning women. 1 and often 2 were most favored, sitting to left and right within reach of expansive arms. A rotating cast arrived when it was time for a fresh round of drinks and left after a few smiles and polite laughs with the potentate. The outside eye might have noticed many things, like the magnetic attraction of silicone to cash. But like magnetism, the attraction rose not in a linear manner, but with the square of its components. Roughly and crudely spoken, the increase in cup size from B to C required cash to increase from $20 to $50, while a D consumed $100. Anything further required mathematics on a scale akin to interstellar travel. There were other similarities to mathematics, especially when alcohol was figured into the equation. The less sober the man, the more likely the table dance. As a corollary, the less sober the man, the more likely the attraction to inhumanely large breasts. And perhaps just as important, the less sober the man, the more likely the arrival of another round. Though the king often assumed it was through the force of his beneficent personality, the harem clung to him because of the table dance, $20 for 3.5 minutes, the length of a song. Were any member of the harem diligent and opportunistic, a given potentate might buy 6 dances in an hour. $120 for a leisurely 1 song on, 2 songs off. Just short enough time between songs that the potentate might truly believe himself a 60-minute man. The undisputed bunker record was 8 table dances and 3 couch dances in a single hour, and a stunning 23 over the course of the evening. Held by Destiny, a feat of mechanical engineering, the record was only for the single potentate. She performed 3 dances for 2 of her regulars that same night. Though the potentate might have believed he should be rewarded at closing time with more than a kiss on the cheek, it was not to be. A count of shots commensurate with the dances rendered the point moot. When describing a man whose true name was lost to the annals of history, Destiny would only shake her head and hold her thumb and forefinger less than 3 inches apart. That was always good for a howl in the dressing room. The most expensive single dance was bestowed upon a minor potentate who had resolved in a single night to blow a 4 number out of 6 lottery ticket. 5 dancers crowded him, bumping into and over each other such that it had the appearance less of a dance and more of a rugby scrum. The only clear memory the recipient had was of his temples being massaged by sets of jewelried nipples, a memory which sustained him through many long nights. And though the tales of the potentates, kings, princelings, sultans, and rajas are enough to fill many books, there was only one professor. His title was gained innocently enough. Years ago, and even then a known regular, a redhead in a sequined gown sat on his right, and to his left a brunette in daisy dukes and a tube top. A waitress happened by and started laughing hard enough that she needed to lay her tray on his table. She called for all to hear that she'd always figured the professor was doing Ginger and Marianne both. Though he looked nothing like the TV character, it was such a good laugh that the nickname stuck. He'd turned 10 shades of red, but the name had outlasted either dancer, and he wouldn't have looked up if anyone used his Christian name. The name stuck in part because he did the things a professor ought to do, at least what the patrons and employees thought a professor ought to do. When the computer station for the trivia game was installed, it was assumed the professor knew the answers to all questions, and so he was called from his table many times, and many times pulled to the bar by man and woman alike to answer questions vexing. In all subjects, he was right better than 90% of the time, and even when he was wrong, his chosen answer was always the next closest to right. The terminal was removed after a workman's comp claim involving a collision between the professor, 2 dancers, and a waitress. Then there was the incident spoken of in hushed tones of both reverence and sadness. It was said, though never proven, that the professor was drunk. Romeo and Juliet were mentioned in a moment of sarcasm directed at a rather butch customer and her chosen dancer. At that, the professor recited the entire balcony scene. By the time he was finished, a waitress and 2 more dancers were at the table. They clapped. They asked for more. Actually, they pleaded and begged. Candy, whose unfortunate end was too sad a story to tell, offered to be or not to be, and it was as though a switch had been thrown. Had any of them seen the movie, they would have recognized the cadence and rhythm of Olivier in the professor's rendition of Hamlet's soliloquy. Before he was finished, the dancers stopped dancing. They all knew his voice, but each heard something they'd never known before. As the stage dancers clung to their brass poles, soon enough the patrons noticed the dancers' attention drawn not to a dollar, but to a man. For a moment more, they too turned, and even the volume of music died. More? Candy's voice was as soft as a lover's breath. All eyes were on him. He saw none but hers. "Please," said Stormy. The professor said while Candy led him to the corner stage. He couldn't have realized he was on stage. Don't know." She handed the professor a beer. "Henry V," she said while he quenched his thirst. Her smile became his while searching in his head for the words. She spoke. "He is full of valor as of kindness, princely in both. Oh, that we not had here but 10,000 of those men in England today that do no work. What's he that wishes so?" He howled indignation, and the words poured out. It was not Olivier nor Brana or any movie actor. His words stirred 40 men and 20 women from sleep take up arms for king and country. "This story shall the good man teach his son, and Crispin shall ne'er go by, from this day to the ending of the world, but we in it shall be remembered." He paused and raised his beer. "We few, we happy few, we band of brothers," and glasses were raised by all in toast to King Harry, and toast to his men at Agincourt, and in toast to themselves. "For he today that sheds his blood with me shall be my brother, be he ne'er so vile, this day shall gentle his condition. And gentlemen in England now abed shall think themselves accursed, they were not, and hold their manhoods cheap, while any speaks that fought with us on St. Crispin's day." He drank, and they drank, and a cheer went up. The professor was clapped upon the back, his hair was mussed, his cheek was kissed by many, and Candy smiled at him all the while it took before he reclaimed his seat. The professor asked if he really did that. "You were magnificent." The blush of his skin fed the blush of her own, and in that moment, minutes after Shakespeare was brandied about a titty bar, Puck himself might have turned a spell. It was assumed that Candy finally made her way into the professor's bed that very night. She was unable to confirm it, for she never returned to the bunker, and it was a long time before the professor returned, and much, much longer before he could even pretend to be the professor.
Kitty had taken time for a leisurely cigarette in a restroom break. Her cash was counted and folded around her garter, a rubber band around the bills to keep them in place. $70 in an hour and change, 2 more table dances, and she could coast. That was when Manhattan stomped into the dressing room. Kitty was going to ask what she was mad about, but Manhattan had only outrun by 2 steps the smell. "Jesus Christ!" Mom crinkled her face. "He fucking puked on me!" She held her arm away from her body while she passed Kitty and Mom. "The suit?" Kitty called over the running water. "I told you he'd been overserved. I tried to get Dawn to cut him off." The water stream was muffled by paper towels soaking in the sink. Kitty wanted to help, but first, she was going to finish her cigarette. Mom lifted herself from the chair, shaking her head while she walked to the bathroom door. She is called the house mom because there isn't enough room on a business card to list her actual titles. She is seamstress because long hems often get caught beneath an oversized heel. She is laundress because no commercial laundry could give the proper care to 100 costumes of translucent fabric, nor properly assure that fringe and feathers would survive the process. She is convenience store clerk, because someone was always in mid-cycle, and if there were two, one was certain to forget her tampons. She, too, is provider of mouthwash, toothbrush, or mints when bourbon-colored breath, before, during, and after a shift. She is bodyguard, because she is the dancer's last line of defense. She is psychologist, because when a girl can no longer stand to be on the floor, the dressing room is the only place to retreat. She is cheerleader, because she is the last woman a dancer sees before she steps on main stage. And she is the first woman seen when a dancer steps off, and sometimes there is need of encouragement. She is cop, because the Texas Alcoholic Beverage Commission inspectors might overlook an overserved patron, but not an overserved dancer, and the license to serve is the lifeblood of any topless bar. Blood or breath tests could not read an alcohol level more accurately than a good house mom, and theirs was a good house mom. For the same reason, she is the holder of car keys. She is masseuse, when feet are tired, because a dancer can't take her shoes off when on the floor, though many men would offer to massage their feet, which was exactly why they couldn't take their shoes off on the floor. She is arbiter of disputes, because fights cannot take place on the floor, though many men would pay good money to watch, which was exactly why there could be no fights on the floor. She is confidant and confessor, because dancers are all rife with secrets, and the wrong ones think their hearts are full of sin. With a laying on of hands and a kiss on the forehead, she lightens the load of those that slept with the wrong man or woman, because that is almost always why the wrong ones think their hearts are full of sin. She knows of loves unrequited, she knows which hearts are broken and which can be healed. She may even know who can heal them. She knows which customers are despised and which are beloved, and in both cases she knows why, whether it was a clumsy pass or a wary touch. And if she is all these things to dancer, she is usually the same to waitress too, and for so many of the same reasons. With 100 titles more, 100 duties of the house mom would be overlooked. But mostly, she is the house mom because, as it is any time that humans gather, they try to build families. And every family needs a mother. Kitty listened to Manhattan rant, but she didn't really hear. She remembered once or twice holding Manhattan's head when scotch had mixed with tequila, with jello shots, and God knew what else. She liked the girl, but Manhattan tended to drink whatever the customer was drinking. Kitty couldn't really say too much. There had been a time she'd done the same thing, because it gave her something in common with the customer, but with the same result. Over the years, she'd acquired the gift of leaving a table mere minutes before somebody puked where they were sitting or ran past with their hands clamped over their mouth. And it had been many years since she'd drunk that much herself. Kitty shared her cigarette with Manny. Was he running a tab? I don't remember. No, the strawberry blonde was trying to build a sudsy lather with the pump soap. At least none of them waitresses got screwed on a tab. Mom rubbed Manhattan's back. They were the problem. Every time they asked, he had them bring a shot, sometimes doubles. Kitty took her cigarette back for a puff before holding it to her friend's lips. Was he tipping them? The quarter or 50 cents that was change. That last round, he tipped a 5. The bubblegum pink pump soap finally started to lather. I bet he thought it was a 1. Mom helped peel the dress off the little Manhattan. That dress would have to soak a while. No doubt. Kitty said. Sorry, but I got one waiting. She put the cigarette back in Manhattan's lips. Just for S&Gs, how much do you figure he spent? Must have been $200 for dances. He bought that much at least in drinks, foreign beers, and top shelf. Wouldn't you love to hear the story he tells his wife? I wonder how much dry cleaners charge to get puke out of a silk suit. Kitty laughed too, and if Manny was starting to joke, it would be okay. See you on the floor. The heels felt better. They were still too tall by half an inch, but the boots had felt like a ceiling painter's stilts. Her walk was much sexier when she didn't have to lean against walls like a 4-year-old learning to ice skate. She could see the thin guy's head over the top of the brass rail around the couches. After a few steps, she could see that Sierra had not only hogged the dollars on stage, she'd taken the thin guy too. She whispered an epithet. As the hour crossed into 8, then closer to 9, a sober and impartial observer would have noticed many eyes were on the velvet curtain entrance, not all at once or any single set for a long time, but a head would turn from a seat at the bar or a chance look glanced at the curtain. The dancer on 2 concentrated the tipper's attention on her butt, since most of them came to 2 from the other side. Conversely, the girl on 3 used her breasts more so she could look over the tipper's head and see the entrance. Not all of them were looking for the professor, but most had regulars due. A group came in at 8:30. Groups weren't always a bad thing, a bachelor party usually. When Kitty noticed, she looked at Carly and shook her head the barest amount. Sharks. Carly shrugged and stepped off her bar stool, pausing just long enough to gain her balance and pull her skirt down a little. Her step down the bar was slow, an intercept course plotted with radar precision. Sharks always took 2 tables against main stage, to the right of the dancer on stage. Carly meant for paths to cross just before they sat down. Sharks, it should be said, were any group of Hispanics, so named for the gang from West Side Story. These sharks were regulars, and Kitty steered clear. Drunk or sober, their hands were always crawling. Not that the Jets, any group of whites, were any better. Kitty only tended toward them for bachelor parties, as the groom was always treated to drinks and dances, and usually enough drinks that who was dancing really didn't matter. Their hands usually didn't reach for anything less than a C-cup. Probably something to do with their first sighting of a breast in Playboy or Penthouse, but they were always going after an ass. They always sat stage left, and it didn't matter if the sharks were opposite or not. As in the play, if Jets and Sharks were there, you were a Jets girl or a Sharks girl. The worst thing, the very worst thing, both Jets and Sharks thought for the price of a couple of drinks, they were entitled to something more than pleasant company. And they didn't ever tip the dancer of main stage so close they wouldn't have to leave their seats. They were perhaps the anti-professors. The professor might lay his hand over Kitty's, but the only time his hand touched where it shouldn't was if a dancer was in danger of falling over. Chairs with rollers and alcohol made that more common than you'd think. But if his hand touched, it never crawled. Even so, the professor made his appreciation known. The crudest couldn't help but notice the obvious. The more subtle recognized something else, a sound they couldn't really hear, an animal purr that reached their skin, like an old-fashioned vibrator transmitting through bone and flesh. The effect was more intense than any battery-powered toy. At least it was for Kitty. And when he really liked to dance at, there was a moment after it was over. He'd lean toward the dancer's ear and whisper, "Wow," soft and stretched like after a teenager's first kiss. And if she asked which part he liked best, he wouldn't just smile.
Kitty found him infuriating, yet strangely sweet. Kitty enjoyed the stage, feeling a kind of unstated power there. The illogic of being paid to tease was the most obvious example of the madness a dancer could cause. Trolling the room was what she hated. Since Dale was a bust, she headed toward the big guy who tipped her on main. There was another guy at the table, but no other dancer. In a room still closer to empty than full, that was a warning sign. Just as she'd started to when she'd arrived, Kitty headed toward the bar. This time, she reached it. "Howdy," she greeted Skates. Nobody had ever been able to tell Kitty exactly how the waitress had earned her nickname, but that's what everybody called her. "What's the story on those 2 guys in the corner?" Skates looked over Kitty's head. "Oh, the Weekenders tagged him for Vice." Kitty looked around Skates, found the Weekenders, and waved. 2 at the table pointed toward the corner and held their other hand like a gun. One motioned his closed right hand over his open left as though he were writing a ticket. All 4 of the Weekenders present wore mustaches. One covered a bald spot with a straw cowboy hat, one with a gimme cap, and a third with a toupee. None of the Weekenders was less than 40, exactly the age when most cops look forward to retirement. That's what the Weekenders are, police reservists. Kitty would have sat with them, but they tended toward blondes, not brunettes, and they preferred under 25, fender lizards. Some folks were born to be cops, not that that's a bad thing. It's certainly not a job for everyone. When it comes right down to it, it's a job hardly anyone is really qualified for. Unfortunately, for all the good cops, there are bad cops. Not in the sense that they beat confessions out of prisoners, or bad in the sense that they're on the take. Bad in the sense that they just shouldn't be cops. Everybody knows the type. They knew they wanted to be a cop the first time they saw Starsky and Hutch, or Dragnet, or Adam 12. They learned police procedure from Hill Street Blues and interrogation from film noir. If they make it to the streets, their eyes lit up when a suspect ran, visions of cops dancing through their dreams. And God help them during a car chase. Each and every last one of them has memorized the chase in bullet, in detail down to which parts were the same run but from another camera position. And they all think they're Steve McQueen, who was a pretty good driver, but even he didn't drive most of those shots. There are enlightened places in Texas that have been known to herd high-speed pursuits toward whatever border crossed into Department of Public Safety jurisdiction. State troopers are allowed to shoot during a chase. The ones that make it to the street should have been paying attention to Barney Miller, not Ironside, except that there's more paperwork than in Barney Miller, and the cops, suspects, and complainants aren't nearly as funny. Probably something to do with the mental hospitals diagnosing more psychotics than eccentrics. The ones that don't make it to the street right off might be the worst. They tried at 20 and didn't pass. They try again at 40 and become reserve officers. God save humanity from reserve officers. For the privilege of working traffic 1 day a week for free, they carry a gun. Not just on duty, off duty too. Though there are signs outside of every bar in Texas declaring it illegal to carry firearms inside, those rules don't apply to certified peace officers, on duty or off. That's not to say that the topless bar industry has anything against cops. There are bars in Dallas that would close their doors if not for the cops and pro athletes. And that doesn't even count the literally dozens of special squads and task forces that somehow carved out a piece of turf that included topless bars, narcotics, prostitution, drunk patrol. If school crossing guards could figure out a way, they'd be in the titty bars too. Because the weekenders don't do much besides write traffic tickets, their blue blood doesn't extend to vice cops, especially in what they consider their own bar. That's not to say that vice cops are only there to hassle people. They try to buy drugs from other patrons, from dancers, from waitresses, from bartenders. They try to buy more than a dance from dancers and more than a drink from waitresses. Luckily for the bunker, the dancers more or less policed themselves. A dancer named Princess was once found letting a customer hit a triple, well on his way to an in-the-park homer. As to what occurred in the dressing room a few minutes later, everyone knew exactly what happened, nobody ever said anything. The same was true for drugs, more or less. Recreational use could never be wiped out in the bunker or in the world at large, but commerce was dealt with harshly. Unfortunately, the world at large expects a certain number of infractions at a topless bar, and so the vice cops make a number of bullshit arrests. Arrests for solicitation, which translates to a dancer asking a patron if he'd like a dance. Solicitation also for having naked feet, apparently for the fetishist. And the most bullshit of all, arrests for solicitation of an alcoholic beverage, which in English meant a dancer asked a customer to buy a drink. Strictly speaking, the same offense could apply to another customer or to a waitress, but only the dancers are ever arrested. Lamest of all, the vice cops don't even make the arrest. They leave, call a real cop, and have him go in to arrest the dancer. Which are all reasons why loyalty doesn't extend to vice cops, especially in the weekender's own bar. Even though Kitty had no intention of breaking any laws, she steered well clear. When the world at large expected arrests, Kitty's experience taught her that people would be arrested, whether there were violations or not. Kitty ordered a Coke at the bar and peeked over her shoulder. "He'll be here soon enough," Kelly told her. Who? The professor, the Filipina waitress said. I saw the reserved sign. If he does, he does. If he doesn't, he doesn't. Kelly shook her head and put in her order. 2 tequilas and a scotch. No backs. Kitty asked if they had a girl at the table, not that she was in a tequila or a scotch mood. Yes, yes, by the pool table. Her voice still held a sing-song accent. Kitty didn't recognize the profiles or the back of the girl's head. She saw wisps of facial hair on the guy's and too many holes in the girl's ear. She stopped at 3, though she'd had 2 more that closed up. The girl was adoring one of them. Kitty didn't think it was entirely an act. Tough luck, kid. She'd never found any guy under 25 that knew before the fact whether the shot in his hand was the one to send him over the edge, or many guys over 25. Double tough luck because neither looked to have enough money to last 3 hours, let alone 5 until closing. Triple tough luck because the bunker was not a place where true love would be found, not even a reasonable facsimile. Get a Coke back for the girl, Kitty said to Kelly and Dawn. It's too early for shots without a back. Dawn asked when she had become the alcohol police. Since I cleaned the suit's puke off Manny, I answered. Just do it. Though she was a waitress of 11 months at the bunker and therefore the longest tenured, she couldn't decide whether Dawn or Kitty outranked her. Kelly decided Kitty was the alpha bitch of the dancers, so it didn't matter what she or Dawn thought. She ordered a Coke back. And if I had my druthers, I'd water her shot down too.
There was nothing remarkable about the professor's entrance, nothing physically at any rate. A man of more or less average height and build. The only remarkable thing was the thick leather jacket on a night still in the 80s. That only meant he'd ridden his motorcycle, a Japanese bike he constantly talked about trading in, but never quite got around to following through. Nor was he a handsome man. Something had canted his nose a bit toward the right, something else had canted it toward the left. His bald pate was shiny, and what hair was left had been trimmed fuzzy short. A heavy brow shaded his eyes, even in the dimmest light, and his mouth was a size and a half too big for his face. But he always arrived fresh-shaved and showered, as though the bunker were no different from any other bar. The dancer on 2 waved, and the professor smiled back. That he was scanning was lost on some, and obvious to others. Skates was upon him before he could unzip his jacket. Are you going to run a tab? Since you asked so nice, he smiled. You want I should fetch Kitty? She'll pop her head out of that drink in a minute. He handed the tall young girl his driver's license and a platinum card. And if she doesn't, that's her loss. Would you like a drink? He asked for his usual, and she asked if he meant his usual drink or his usual back. Back. He arranged his jacket so it ringed the inside of the chair back. It fell off if he hung it over the back. Skates nodded and rubbed his head before he sat down. The professor grinned and gave her $1. BB, a little blonde with a Dorothy Hamill haircut, ran over so she too could rub his head. He gave her $1, a running joke after the first time Kitty had rubbed his head. He'd given her $1 as though for a dance. Then $1 to BB when she did the same, for she had his tab that night. Then it became any waitress or dancer that rubbed his head got $1. Not every time, just the first. Even so, he was usually out $5 before he'd spent 10 minutes in the bunker. It was assumed he kept his hair short on purpose. Skates brought back his tab for signature and return of license and card. While he signed, she set a napkin on the table and his tonic water on top of it. She was rubbing his head while he returned license and card into his wallet. She told him his hair was soft, like baby hair almost. Not mink or sable? How would I know from mink or sable? Her voice was soft and her twang heavy. Y'all want something? The professor was about to point at the drink he already had, but the fingernails running across the base of his skull twisted his head around. Weren't you going to say hello? Kitty had been known absent-mindedly rub and lightly scratch a good part of the night. Hello. He motioned toward an open chair. You want anything? She sat and nodded, but didn't remove her hand from his head. Make it 2. I don't need another back. Any shot specials coming up? Skates told him she'd check and she'd be back with their shots. Where have you been? Kitty asked. I missed you.
You were gone 2 weeks ago, I was only gone last week. What, you found a bar with prettier girls? Ain't no prettier girls than this one right here. He gave her $1 when she stopped scratching his head. I was in New York for business. Where were you? I was trying to find a bar with better guys, she smiled, but there ain't none better than this one right here. I missed you too, Kits. So what's new? Not much, she said. Vice cops over in the corner. I thought I'd go over there and ask them to buy me a drink so I could pour it over my naked feet. It would be funnier if I did it, but Vice cops got no sense of humor. Who are they to tell me I can't suck a $7 shot off the naked feet of a woman? My nipples are hard just thinking about it. Skates asked them to count her in on whatever was making Kitty's nipples hard. Then she set the shots of Goldschlager in front of them, with a cookback for Kitty. The professor asked if Skates' mother knew she talked like that. Skates kissed Kitty on the top of the head, and Kitty told the professor that if he wasn't nice, he wouldn't get to watch. And if I am nice, you'll just find another reason why I can't. Probably, but if you're mean, you definitely won't get to. Skates kissed Kitty on the top of her head again and gave the professor a little scratch before she went scouting for thirsty tables. Kitty announced a toast to the professor being nice. He raised his shot and, "To camcorders." When they finished the shot, Kitty told him that wasn't nice. I know it's none of my business, but is she serious? She shrugged. Just a phase, and too young anyway. The professor wore a downtrodden face when he said that, if that was the case, every woman in the joint was too young for him. Not true. She compared him to fine wine, or better yet, whiskey. He had gained subtleties from the barrel and had been gentled by experience. Ah, said the professor. And Skates. Boone's Farm. They laughed and agreed that wasn't a bad nickname either.
It is possible to write a doctoral thesis regarding the names of dancers. In actuality, it is possible to write several. The statistician could analyze the prevalence of names ending in the I sound as opposed to the percentage in the general female population, with a sub-analysis of how often the I sound was spelled with a Y as opposed to IE or a single I. A psychology major might consider the question of equating names with traits. Foxy, Trixie, Randy. The English student might wonder at the chastities, the angels, and other self-mockery. A gastronome might concern himself with the cookies and candies. There had even once been a dancer using the name sorbet, but that didn't last. The meteorologist had the stormies, misties, and sunnies. The cartographer might ponder the names of places, L.A., Manhattan, Dallas, Paris, maybe even a San Antonio Rose, and might research whether the names were chosen for hometowns, wished for future homes, or just places that rolled off the tongue. There's another segment that picks a name that's almost given name. Kristen for Christy, Lee for Leah, and each the other way around. A very few, use their own names. But even then, there have been instances where they couldn't. Another dancer had already chosen it as her nom de guerre. Even a relatively small bar like The Bunker had dozens of dancers on its rolls. Some of them only work one weekend a month or a couple of days a week. Hardly any work more than 3 nights a week. The Bunker might have 20 or 25 dancers on a Friday night, and about the same on Saturday, though there isn't much overlap between the two. Attractive young women want either Friday or Saturday night off, date night, especially if it's the ex's weekend with the kids. That makes 40 and another 15 or so scattered across the day shifts and weeknights. There is nearly chaos in the weeks from Halloween to New Year's when some need money for the holidays. A peak number of dancers show on Thursday night, not as one would think, Friday or Saturday. The Bunker once had 32 dancers on the first Thursday after Thanksgiving. If one included waitresses, the house mom, the bar back, the door, and the beer tub, women outnumbered men. And many male egos were boosted that night. It had been a night like that when Kitty first spent the night, save stage time, at the professor's table. Truth be told, that began the slow descent in her tips. She hadn't ever been one to pay much attention to regulars. Anywhere she'd danced before, there hadn't been much in the way of regulars.
not the kind of regulars she'd tolerate. "Professor," she paused because she sounded so formal, "why do you come here?" "You don't think I should be here?" "Some guys, it's like they have to be here," Kitty answered him. "You've seen 'em." "Like they're purging something," he suggested. Kitty nodded as though that was the word she'd always searched for. Purging. But not me. Not you. I don't know if you've noticed, but over the course of the night, every kind of person is in here. I've seen guys 7 feet tall and 3 feet tall. I've seen guys with afros and comb-overs, guys walking around in open-mouth astonishment, and guys that wouldn't have a nice thing to say about any woman here. The handsome and ugly in word, face, and deed. It's like a microcosm of humanity. Throwing in those nickel words. He explained the origin of the phrase back to when writers were paid by the keystroke. A long word was a nickel word. She saw the logic of it. So why do you seek the microcosm of humanity? I used to not like people as a group. I liked plenty of individuals, I just didn't like people. And now I like people. Even the jerks? Every jerk is some mother's son. Or daughter. Yes, then there are people that think I'm a jerk. Kitty raised her hand and said she did. And there are people that think you're a jerk too. He blew her a kiss. But what it comes down to is, I like it here. I have since the first time I walked through that curtain. Some guys come in here looking like scared rabbits. I've always felt welcome. I draw something in, and I feel better after I talk to you. Really? He nodded. Thank you. No, thank you. And you, why do you come here? I'll bet you could make more money somewhere else, Dallas or one of those clubs in Arlington. I could. I did. I've been doing this a long time. A lot of bars, a lot of cities. But this feels like, I don't know, family. The professor nodded. I miss it when I'm gone too long. It can't be that easy. Why not? It's a great place to people watch. I learn something every time I'm here. One of the first times I was here, a dancer was talking to me about breeding cats. She said that was her real job. Kitty cats? He smiled. Actually, it was Bengals. Like tigers? That was exactly what I asked. It's a cross between a regular cat and some kind of Asian wildcat. I almost bought one of the kittens. You don't seem the cat type. Oh, not for me. Girlfriend? Actually, it was going to be my dog's cat. So she's not lonely? That's sweet. Why didn't you buy it? Too expensive? Kitty tongue rolled an ice cube from one cheek to another. Now, with all that terrier and my dog, I was afraid it'd snap its neck playing. Not on purpose, but she does that head snap thing terriers do. That's 'cause they were bred to kill rats. Now you've learned something today, too. Sorry. He sipped his tonic water. I knew that already. I see little things now. Some of the dynamics around here, for instance. All the regulars have some dancer they're partial to. And vice versa, she motioned toward the professor. And vice versa. When a favorite is on main, have you noticed the regular usually tips before she's topless? Now that he mentioned it, Kitty saw it all the time. Call it a gesture between friends, he answered before she could ask him why that was. Look at tables, really only large enough for 2. I've seen 6 chairs crowded around your table, 5 or 6 girls if you count the dancer on 4. But how often is it just 2? At how many tables is there only a guy? How long will you spend at a table before or after he buys a dance? Depends. Is he good for a second dance? Is he buying drinks? Excellent considerations. And what does he get? Drunk and blue balls? Professor! Yes, I know, your virgin ears. Allow me the crudity for now. I'll bet you come across guys that are only going through the motions. The motions? What kind of place do you think this is? She said it even though she knew that wasn't what he meant. He ignored it because he knew she knew what he meant. They'd just as soon give you $20 for your company and skip the dance, but there's an etiquette to follow. Now that you mention it, she wanted a good song so she could dance for him. The proverbial they might be going through the motions, but she didn't for the professor. There's another movie, an old movie called Harvey, the 6-foot-tall invisible rabbit. 6 foot, 3.5. Let's stick to the facts. It seemed a private joke to the professor. One of the characters, Dr. Chumley, what he wants most is to spend 2 weeks in a cabin outside Akron drinking cold beer while he tells a beautiful woman all the things in his heart. She is to pet his brow and says, "Poor dear, poor dear." So the guys bitching about their wife or their job are Dr. Chumley, and you are the beautiful woman who pets his brow. I'd rather be Harvey. He had all the fun. He was a puka. Best pronounce that right around the sharks, and those heels would have to grow another foot, at least. I'm not so sure, Kitty thought out loud. Do you measure from the top of his ears or the top of his skull? I don't believe I've ever considered the point. Well, consider it. Kitty picked up her half-empty pack of cigarettes. But I have to go. To Akron? Kitty shook her head and kissed the professor's cheek. I didn't hear them call a sound check. Kitty automatically turned to see who was on main. It was a new girl, a very young girl, and she didn't even know her name. No, she said, I'm up after Sierra. The big boss just came in and I need to talk to him. Trouble? No. Well, she tapped a couple of cigarettes from her pack. I'll tell you when I get back. Kitty didn't use her slinkiest walk toward the big boss, nor did she attempt any seduction in the least. He'd been in the business too long to be fooled by a dancer, and Kitty had been a dancer too long to think flirting with the owner changed anything. May I? She pointed to the chair next to the big boss. Please. He flagged down a waitress and asked Kitty if she wanted anything. Just a Coke, she said to one of the myriad of waitresses orbiting the big boss. I'm cut off for a little while. She told him. 'Cause it's a good night or a bad night? Kitty saw him looking around, counting the patrons and the bottles on their tables. A good night, so far anyway. You'd do a lot better if you didn't hang around the professor all night. The man hardly drinks. Kitty didn't tell the boss that was part of why she liked him. The kids tip, but they're not buying dances. Besides, she decided to defend the professor, even if he didn't really need her defending him. He spends a small fortune on drinks for us, even if he's not drinking himself. The big boss didn't agree or disagree, but he knew the professor never had a tab less than $100+, and that was before his typical 35 or 40% tip. Have you been to the new place?
You opened a new place? She asked. Aren't you afraid of saturation? I don't have a new place. I'd start one, but I can't find a lot I like, he answered. I meant the new place down the road a stretch. Kitty told him she hadn't been there yet. Some of the other girls had. She didn't say because they were looking for a more lucrative deal. I saw it advertised in the weekly. It didn't seem like a good location, not enough drive-by traffic. That's why they have to advertise. The big boss never advertised. It drew the wrong kind of attention. Bad location, not enough parking, bad building. It's a steel building, for Christ's sake. A damn barn. It's got to be better on the inside, she suggested. Paneling, plastic laminate, squirrely arrangement, and the fixtures, Jesus. What about them? Cheap chairs and tables like from a mom-and-pop restaurant bankruptcy. Not enough mirrors and, well, just cheesy. So you're not worried? Only about my dancers leaving, waitresses too. Kitty snorted and wondered if that would bump his turnover from 500% to 505. You could be 506. I wanted to talk to you about that, she said. I was thinking about doing something besides dancing. You? I figured you'd be buried in those heels. Kitty shrugged. I don't want to be up there having to fill in my wrinkles with spackle. I could always use waitresses. If you had fewer on the floor, maybe. Why do you do that? There must be 8 or 9 of them out there for 35 tables. Between you and me? Kitty looked at him with suspicion. Simple numbers. Most guys will buy a drink every third or fourth time a waitress asks. More waitresses, more times per hour. Kitty shook her head. I don't want a waitress. The professor is the only tab I could be sure of. And you couldn't spend much time at his table. That too. Do you need a mom? I could be mom on the crappy nights, dance a couple nights, bar back, maybe? The big boss nodded slowly, very slowly. Do you want an answer tonight? She shook her head. I'll think about it, see what Mom thinks. You know you wouldn't be on night shift right off either job. Same as when I started dancing? Worse, he said. I bet you were dancing nights within a week. It might be a month before you can even work Sunday nights. Kitty didn't like it, but she wasn't surprised. What about your other clubs? The one on the south side is closer to home. They don't have the traffic this place does. You might be better off staying here. Money-wise, anyhow. Kitty said. Well, keep me in mind anyway. I will, he said. You know the business, and you haven't ever caused me any trouble. Not yet, Kitty smiled and stabbed out her cigarette.
Kitty had to run from the big boss's table to the dressing room. She'd missed the call for her sound check. There had been times in the past she'd missed it so badly she'd climbed from the floor onto Main. It didn't surprise her at all when the professor was waiting stage right, a couple of bucks in his hand. I meant to come back. She slowly raised her leg over his head and settled so the back of her knee wrapped his neck. I just came over to tell you it broke my heart. His look slowly followed her leg on up to her eyes. I wanted to see if he had any non-dancing jobs. She uncurled her leg and slid her back down his front. I wasn't paying attention. Are we just doing one song on Main? I think so. They opened up 4, he said. You're gonna quit? She shrugged, but it looked like part of her dance. He looked genuinely disappointed. If you'll excuse me, her lips tickled his ear. I need to take my top off. How many times have I heard that in my life? He smiled and slid the bills into her garter. I won't quit tonight. Kitty kissed the top of his head before she slid her top over her head. Oh, he turned around and fished another $1 from his pocket. Would you like a round between here and 2? My savior. Kitty slid her front down his front. He was looking up and smiling. She made sure his chin ran to either side of the cleft of her stomach muscles. Kitty pulled the elastic of her tee back so he could slide his bill there instead of her garter. She kissed the tip of his nose, gave him her dress, and sent the professor back to their table. There was probably a rule somewhere about serving drinks to topless women, but Kitty couldn't see the vice cops anywhere. Besides, she thought, nothing bad happens when the professor's around. Even with Sierra in front of her, Kitty was tipped more than cigarette money. You couldn't have told her so, but it was because she was smiling, laughing, and very nearly gregarious. A lot of that was because the professor was watching. Not all the time, but most of it. He'd smile and wink when she caught him. She smiled too, looking over the head of the holder of $1 or when shaking her ass from the other side of the stage. She even drew the professor with a beckoning finger. So mesmerized was he by that look that he wasn't entirely sure how he'd reached the stage. Yes, darling? He wondered why he was there. I couldn't wait 2 whole songs to see you. I think you've been drinking. Only with you. Liar, he smiled. Mostly with you. Good enough. He slid $1 into her garter. She called him back because she didn't think he'd received $1's worth of dance. She bumped his chest with her ass and laughed. She even climbed the pole, which was unusual for Kitty, and she'd never been known to climb any pole but on Main stage. She didn't have the cleavage for a gravity-defying dance, but she executed a descent every bit as graceful as anything in Cirque du Soleil. The professor gave her a yelled yow of appreciation, and Kitty made at least $10 in tips off a move she'd really only intended for him. Once she reached 4, Kitty tried to duplicate the move for a returning tipper. The stage was too confining for the exact same feat.
but she locked a foot behind her ankle and gripped the pole with her knees, falling back with arms spread until she looked like an upended crucifixion. The tipper nodded and clapped in appreciation of her effort. Kitty finished her tour, stepped off 4, and pulled her dress over her head. She told the professor she thought she'd change dresses for her next set. "Whatever makes you happy. What were you thinking about? That little black lacy kind of thing? You like that one?" She reconsidered, then reconsidered. "I picked up a blue dress. It's kinda skimpy." "I like it already," he winked. "You want another drink? Another Coke?" "I'm okay." Kitty indulged in a pleasant buzz. Mickey detoured toward their table on her way from Maine to 2. She smiled at the professor and leaned over to whisper in Kitty's ear. The professor wore a bemused look. Kitty supposed it was because Mickey was flicking the ring through a smallish nipple. Leaning over must have shifted her into lap dance mode. Kitty asked her to repeat herself. "Mom wants you in the back." "I just sat down." "She told me to get you." Kitty whispered a curse and rattled her pack of cigarettes. "What?" asked the professor, while stutter steps on 2 tall heels carried Mickey away. Kitty shook her head while she shrugged. "I'll be back." She tapped the still unwrapped second pack. Kitty was building up a tirade, time to release the moment she turned the corner into the dressing room. She began with something like, "He's my best goddamn customer, and I haven't said 2 words to him all night." She didn't get the chance to start. "It's Jasmine." "New girl?" Mom nodded. "And?" She locked herself in the bathroom. "Do I look like a locksmith?" Kitty kicked the opportunity to light a cigarette. "I can find my key. If I ask for Dougie's, he'd want to get involved." "I suppose that would be the cowboy way." "I always figured you had a kid." "What?" "Only somebody with a kid would know about the cowboy way. Can we get back to the issue at hand?" Mom looked like she was going to add something, but stopped herself. "None of my business, really." Kitty might have nodded. "Kid," she knocked on the door. "You in there?" She put her ear against the door and could hear as clear as day through another hollow steel door. In a whisper, she asked for the kid's real name. Mom shrugged. Kitty couldn't remember what she looked like. It seemed like the new ones were always blonde, as she had been her first night. "Kid, I don't remember if we've met. I'm Kitty." She felt like an idiot. A penknife and it would have been over already. The kid was crying. Kitty looked hard at Mom, thinking she'd been set up for some kind of house mom test. "Can you tell me what happened? I've been doing this a long time. I bet whatever it was, it's happened to me too. Did some guy stiff you after a dance? Your boyfriend found out you were dancing? There was one I met dancing, but he didn't want me dancing. That's not something you want to hear. Your high school geometry teacher tipped you? Give me a hint." Kitty couldn't tell for sure, but it sounded like it was a guy from high school. Kitty mouthed to Mom that high school was probably 2 days ago. "It happens." Kitty's voice had lost most of its edge. "Once I had a cousin walk in, but it wasn't one of my cousins I liked." That didn't stop her from taking the next Greyhound out of Dodge. "Do you remember taking anything?" "A pill." The kid didn't seem to be crying as much. "What kind?" She didn't know. Kitty smacked her own forehead. She'd done a lot of stupid things, but that had never been one of them. "Did you get it from one of the girls? I can find out what it was." "It was a mark." Kitty looked at the ceiling tiles and mouthed that the kid was stupid, stupid, stupid. "Uppers, downers, ecstasy?" "It was yellow." "Yellow jackets?" Mom suggested. Kitty nodded. Of all the possibilities, that was one of her better options. "Okay, I think you're just coming down hard. It's like a hangover. Open up the door and we'll fix you up." Mom was sure somebody had some whites. "And I bet I know who." Kitty shook her head but didn't name names. "Nothing that strong. You get her a Coke. I've got some no-dos in my bag. Real Coke, not diet." Mom took her orders and left. "I don't want to go out there." The kid's voice echoed off the bathroom tile and inside the door. God, she sounded young. Told her she could skip a set. There are plenty of girls. She heard movement on the other side of the door and took the time to grab her gym bag and rummage until she found the 3/4 empty bottle of caffeine pills.
The kid's face showed through a crack in the door. Kitty had been right. She was blonde and still had a bit of baby fat. She looked at the mascara smears and red eyes, then back at the bottle, then back at the kid. A double dose would be enough to ease her up, then gradually down. "Swallow them," she said. Mom came back soon enough that the kid didn't have to dry swallow them the way Kitty did driving home. The kid's whole body shivered while she said she hated pills. "Never, ever, 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 ever take anything that a Mark offers you. First off, he might have been a cop. Nobody wants that kind of trouble. You didn't know what the hell you were getting. It could have been anything. It could have been rat poison for all you know. And while we're at it, never drink anything that a waitress didn't hand you. Assholes will slip shit into your drink. You were with those frat boys. They're the fucking worst about that shit. Isn't there some kind of orientation?" Mom said that she talked, but nobody listened. "I guess I never did either," said Kitty. "Kid, I'm gonna do you a favor. Get yourself cleaned up, put on your makeup, and you can come sit with me and the professor until you feel better." "Who's the professor?" "That should have been part of orientation too. Mom, tell her about the professor while she cleans up."
"Still cold," the professor pointed at the shot glass. "You're a lifesaver." Kitty slid into her chair. The professor waited for her to light another cigarette before he raised his own shot. She tossed hers back before there could be a toast. The professor followed. "Oh, it's Rumpelmints. Are you trying to get me drunk?" The shot hit her gut like a grenade. "Not at these prices. I don't have enough cash to get you drunk," he said, "which is why I run a tab." Kitty smiled. The alcohol shockwave rippled up to her face. "So, what went on back there?" She sighed and shook her head. "New kid, a case of the jitters. I said she could sit with you, is that okay?" He shrugged. "I don't see why not." Then he looked concerned. "I'm not training you for her." Kitty shook her head. "Oh no, alcohol for her. Underage? That too, but her jitters were not entirely natural in origin." It was the professor's turn to sigh. "Children," they said together. Not, it seemed, for the first time. "I guess you've got to go past your limits to know where they are." Sometimes again, and again, and again. Kitty stacked her shot glass on top of his. "Not like us. I don't think either one of us were ever kids." Kitty blew cigarette smoke over her shoulder. "I can't remember that far back." Kitty was brushing her limit and the last shot hadn't yet taken effect. "I don't understand you." "I think maybe you do," he answered. When she tilted her head to look at him, he said he didn't wear much of a mask. "Sometimes you do." She paused. "You think I do?" "Not here," he tapped the tabletop. "Mostly." She asked the professor to explain himself. "Everybody wears a mask. You see guys every day that are flat lying about something. Being single, their job, how much money they make. Most dancers flat out mold themselves to be whatever they think a mark is looking for. After a couple of drinks, some guys don't see it, or maybe they're willing to overlook it. Everything you're talking about, I was. I'm not like that here." She tapped the tabletop. "With you, I mean. Am I?" "Not for a while." "When was I?" "Well, you were here a month, 6 weeks before you came over to my table. You must not have tipped me on stage. I would have come over if you'd tipped me." "Not true," he said. "You probably didn't come over because there was already a girl or two here." Kitty didn't disagree. What he said was probably true. "And when you finally did, you were wearing your act like an alligator hide." Again, she didn't disagree. "But you saw through my act." "No." He shook his head. "I saw that it was an act. I'm not criticizing. I'll bet back in the dressing room you were the sweetheart I know now. Are you flirting with me?" "A little. Is it working?" "A little." She smiled. "Some of them are still acting back there, like movie actors playing strippers. But that's who you needed to be to get through the night." Kitty nodded. "If I'm not getting too personal, why'd you drop the act?" "Who says I'm not acting now?" She smiled, ever so secretly. "I'm kidding.
Honestly, I tried every bit I knew, being aggressive, being demure, the slut, the schoolgirl. If I was a dominatrix, you made me want to laugh at myself. When I was the slut, you still treated me like a lady. I'd only ever seen from guys trying to stay the night, but you can see their act. Everybody said you were for real. It didn't feel right acting around you, like a play where everybody is a little too smart for their own good. The prince plays the butler, his niece pretends to be somebody's mistress to break up an engagement. He offered farce. That's it. You see through the act, so it's a farce. I didn't want to play the fool. In the great plays, the fool has the keenest insight. He's often the only one without an agenda, except for Hop Frog. Kitty shook her head, not recognizing the name. A dwarf jester in a Poe story. He killed his king and ministers to revenge an insult. I like that, to revenge an insult. There is a poetry to that manner of speech. So, are you the fool or a wise man playing the fool? I've always liked that. He smiled. Drunk or sober, you've still got your wits. You didn't answer my question, but you never really answer my questions. I'm a fool wearing the mask of a wise man. And what mask do I wear? Do I wear a mask? He didn't lie to her and say no. She'd never known the professor to be dishonest. Not about something important. Not a mask, he said. A veil maybe, but sheer like a bride's. Just opaque enough that I'll never really understand you. My ways are mysterious. Beguiling even. Now you're toying with me. Never. His smile bordered on the mystic. The cat toys with the mouse, not the other way around. Am I toying with you? He shrugged, but she shook her head. Kitty doesn't toy with her Tom. He smiled. I wasn't sure you'd make the connection. Cat and kitty, the drunks usually go for kitty and pussy. Philistines. It was her turn to shrug. It bothered me the first time I heard it. You should never have to hear it. Would they were all like you? She laid her hand over his, rubbing slightly. It's just 'cause I'm not as drunk as the other guys. I've seen you drunk, not then either. Between you and me, you could get away with anything with almost any of the girls, waitress or dancer. The professor's eyebrows raised, and Kitty nodded to affirm it. Mom just told me the same thing, more or less. Between you and me, getting away with something isn't my objective. So what is your objective? He shrugged and said, watching pretty girls and having a few drinks with friends. Maybe that's the difference, she said. The professor looked as though he might say something, but a look from Kitty settled him in his chair. A bunch are after a cheap feel, something to think about while they're with their wife. You can usually spot them. They're putting her head on top of my body or my head on top of hers. They're the guys talking big, trying to impress somebody. And the remainder? She almost hit him for interrupting, but he seemed genuine. You don't want to know. But his look told her that he did. Sometimes it's like you can see the handcuffs in their eyes, but not fur-lined kind. Not that I know anything about them. She tried to lighten the mood. Even then, they're worse. You see the guys 40, 45 going after the real young ones, especially if they look even younger than they are. Pigtails and bobby socks. They're seeing their neighbor's daughter, their stepdaughter. God damn them, their own daughter. Stalkers, rapists, and serial killers. Then there's you. What fine company I keep. After she threatened him again, he promised to shut up. Make a pass at the next girl, you won't be alone tonight. Who says I sleep alone? He couldn't tell if he was offended or only playing he was. She decided playing. You're not the type to be here if there was a girl at home. To quote the artist, women, not girls, rule my world. At what age does a girl become a woman? At what age did you become a woman? You're avoiding the question, she said, as she avoided his. Maybe you thought you were a woman when you started puberty, or after your first kiss, your first beer, or after your first time. Maybe it was your first time on stage. I can't tell you when. Maybe it was the first time you saw how beautiful you are, not because somebody said you were, but because you knew. When he thought she was embarrassed, he told her he'd always thought so, even when she was acting. That's what I get for making you answer. I could never have gotten the actress to blush. Stop it, she said. He did, but she wasn't sure she really wanted him to. She decided it was the alcohol. The professor nodded slowly while he stared into the empty shot glasses. Right then, he looked country song lonely, and she knew she was the only one who could see it. Or maybe that last shot had kicked in and she felt country song lonely. "Christ," she said, "don't drag me into your melancholy." "Good word," he answered. "Yeah." I slapped the table. "It's Friday, let's have fun." "To a fun Friday," the professor raised his tonic water back. She agreed and raised her Coke back. They looked at each other for half a minute before the professor asked what they were going to do that was fun. "We could make fun of the bad boob jobs," she suggested. "You mean like Sierra? I've seen macaroni art with better symmetry." The professor laughed and said he might have to write that one down. "We could make fun of the drunks," he suggested. "That table? Those guys wearing dusters like triggers parked out front instead of their Taurus? Damn, that's cold. The venom is starting to flow. Now we're having fun. That's why I come here. I can see half-naked women on table, but those kitties don't have claws. I see a bad theme developing. I don't know that I have any more. Of course, I have too much pride to go for the easy ones." "Ouch." She paused. "Besides, that would make you a cheetah." "You're not lying." "Disallowed." She waved it off. "You used pride, you can't use lion." Shit. He looked around, apparently trying to find a hint. It never occurred to him to contest her ruling. Kitty thought she might win this time. Jaguar, tiger, bobcat. It looked like he was thinking about bobcat, but then he shook his head. Lynx, panther, puma, ocelot? No. I guess this leopard can't change his spots. It was Kitty's turn to curse. She went from kitty litter to collar bells to cubs, kittens, and bowls of milk. "You won this round, but you've caught a tiger by the tail." She was quite pleased with herself. "Touché." He held his hands over his heart. "I yield." "You give up too easy." "Who says I gave up? I'm plotting my vengeance."
"Vengeance is mine, saith the Lord." The devil can cite scripture for his purpose. "Shakespeare. I heard about you in Shakespeare." Kitty shook her finger. Same game, different theme. Neither one had noticed when the kid slid into the chair next to Kitty, though there was a free chair next to the professor. Come, you wasp. I faith you are too angry." Oh, Kitty said. "I know this one. Liz Taylor, it was a TV show, Taming of the Shrew." "Excellent. Petruchio. Who knows not where a wasp does wear his sting? In his tail." "You really know this stuff," Kitty said. "Wait, Katharina, in his tongue. Petruchio, whose tongue? Katharina, yours. If you talk of tails, and so farewell. Petruchio, what, with my tongue in your tail?" Kitty shook her head while the kid sat open-mouthed. Petruchio still. "Nay, come again, good Kate, I am a gentleman." Kitty was still chuckling while she told the professor that was probably the rudest thing he had ever said to her. "What? It's Shakespeare," he explained. "Did I actually embarrass you even a little?" "It's the mask," she said. "You can't see how deeply offended I am." "No, the offensive part is later. He actually breaks her spirit. The movie didn't show it, and I know which episode you're talking about. I actually taped it the first time it was on TV. Maybe I'm weird, but I liked Kate better as a shrew." The professor took his eyes off Kitty. "Hello." "Jasmine, this is the professor," she said. "Professor? Jasmine." "How do you do?" "Hi." She gave him a little wave. "I hate to meet and run," he said. "We're not going anywhere." Kitty excused him. "Back in a minute." He stood and pushed his chair under the table. Manhattan intercepted him on the way to the restroom. She spun him around like it was a ballroom waltz, though it was the romantic's one hit. She rubbed his head while they turned. He pointed toward the restroom door, then back at Kitty and Jasmine. She released him. "He owes me $1. She took up the chair across from Kitty. Kitty made introductions between the two dancers. "You should ask him for a dance," Manhattan told Jasmine. The kid looked around like she had suggested they rob a bank. Kitty and Manhattan both smiled when told it was against the law. "The professor's cool." Manhattan waved skates down and asked for a rum and coke, big glass, and very little ice. The pros smiled when the kid told them that was against the law too. Skate said she was going to run right to a phone and call 911. "You guys okay?" "I think so," Kitty said. "You should dance for him."
Then she swapped seats so that the kid was next to the professor's empty chair. When the kid was still reluctant, the professor waited for the tail end of the song before he quietly asked if she would dance for him. She whispered, "Okay," and the professor moved his chair away from the table and against the wall, allowing her room. Kitty and Manhattan both sat back to watch. They usually did, especially for a virgin, mostly so they could jump in to keep a guy honest. The kid stood in front of him, her eyes closed. Virgins always close their eyes. She started moving, her head rocking back and forth, the motion carried down her neck into her shoulders, her back, her butt side, and legs. For pros, it started in their butt and went out from there. Her hands moved down her sides, across the fabric of her dress. Love Shack came over the speakers, but she was dancing to music in her head. The professor was still trying to look at her eyes, closed though they were. The kid slipped out of her straps. It was a clumsy movement to slide the dress down and step her platforms out of piled cloth at her feet. She had her back to the professor and her palms over her breasts. Christ, Kitty thought 18 and good-sized C's, probably firm enough to bounce a quarter off, and nipples that were neither too small nor too large, not too dark nor too pink. Kitty had to get out of the business before she was run out. When she glanced at Manhattan, it looked like she was thinking the same thing, and Manhattan was 5 years younger than Kitty. The professor was still trying to look at the kid's eyes. Kitty guessed they were still closed. If she stayed in the business, the kid would learn to dance for somebody else even while she was looking at a mark. She remembered how scared she was that first night. She wasn't even Kitty then. No matter how much she drank, it didn't take the edge off. Another dancer tried to help her, but she hardly opened her eyes that first night or the second. Some of the guys told how pretty she was. Eventually she understood that topless and naked were two different things, and naked didn't have anything to do with clothes. When she dared watch herself in the mirrors, more confident with each movement timed to the music, she could open her eyes and see that they wanted to look at her. Kitty wanted to plant all that in the kid's head, but she'd have to learn it for herself, the same way she'd have to learn to work the room. This kid might be the kind that watched herself in the mirrors the whole time she did a table dance, using the mirrors to scan in the room, picking out which eyes were watching her dance for somebody else. Kitty found herself doing that more often than she liked. The song trailed off, and the kid was getting a little bolder. She might be good at it. Kitty and Manhattan applauded. "Thank you," she whispered to the professor, her eyes finally open. "You're a very pretty girl." He was so sincere, she almost forgot to lift her garter for his 20. He thanked her, and she thanked him again, kissing him gently on the cheek. Manhattan told the kid to put her dress on. They needed to go to the dressing room. Okay, she said. "Did you like the dance?" "He liked it, kid." Manhattan led her away from the table. "I could see it from where I was sitting." Kitty laughed. The professor raised his fist, and Manhattan threw him a kiss.
"She danced for the professor," Manhattan told Mom. "Good for you, kid. Did he behave?" The kid nodded. "Did you know what you were getting with that tattoo?" Manhattan asked. "She's got runes." Mom asked to see, and the kid pulled her top down enough to reveal the etched lines of the U. "Never was much for stones," Mom said. "I do better with tarot. Is it just the fortunes, or do you practice?" The kid shrugged and nodded both. "Good," Manhattan said. "Good what?" "You know how we're always talking about how we ought to do something for the professor?" "You want to cast a spell?" Mom asked. Manhattan nodded. "For him and Kitty." "A love spell?" the kid asked. "See, it's obvious to everybody." Mom tapped her chin while she thought. "My coven has kind of strict rules against it. Now, the Book of Shadows is against making somebody who doesn't love you love you." Mom didn't disagree, but she didn't really agree either. "All I've ever heard of love spells is them going wrong." "I've always wanted to try one," the kid said. "And we're not doing it for ourselves." Manhattan became the center of altruism. "You never thought about doing it for them?" Mom told her that thinking and acting were two different things. That was when Manhattan knew they were going to do it. But she knew better to not act like she knew. The kid was biting her lower lip, her eyes bright and eager. Mom tapped her finger against her chin again. "The only ones I know need blood, but that's when the caster wants the love herself." Manhattan smiled, and the kid clapped her hands. "I think we might need a fourth. A love potion, maybe, but those are supposed to sit for a couple of days." "I know one. It's got cinnamon and wine and vanilla, I think, but it's supposed to sit too." "Some ginger root?"
I think it's supposed to have ginger root, but we don't have any of that. The hell we don't, Mom said, louder than she intended. This is a bar. We've got all that stuff. Goldschlager for cinnamon? And hot damn, they both drink that sometimes. That's even better. Maybe throw a couple of red hot candies, too. Mom nodded slowly. Real ginger ale, ginger snaps in a pinch? And vanilla extract, yeah, said the kid. But it's got to be the real stuff from Mexico, not that supermarket stuff. Mom checked her watch and said that if they didn't have the real stuff, I'm sure there was something at the liquor store a block over. You know, Manhattan said, I wish his hair was longer. We could braid some hair from both of them. Then braid it into a loop. That would work good, Mom said. But we don't want to go overboard. Bad things happen when you go overboard. Now, the need for belonging is as much a part of human nature as the need to procreate, the need to eat, the need to breathe. If, in the deepest reaches of prehistory, a second ape and a third hadn't come down from the trees, humanity would still be there, picking fleas from the pelts of our neighbors and reminding ourselves of how great it was being with our friends. Lions have prides, wolves have packs, sheep have flocks, crows have murders, and guys have bars. Even in the bunker, there is as much talk about whatever game is on the big screen as the attributes of this stancer or that. Usually there's more talk about the game, or the outrageous price of a beer or a shot, or how the battery finally died in the truck. No warning like you'd expect. It just one morning up and died. At one of these openings, any guy within 3 table lengths would answer, "Damn straight," while he nodded and held up his beer. It wouldn't have mattered what was said. Someone would say damn straight and hold up his beer. He didn't even have to agree, but he wanted to belong even if under other circumstances he'd branded the speaker one or another kind of idiot. With enough tequila shots, damn straight became fucking A, and glasses would not only be held aloft, but crash together. It may be the peculiar condition of man, small m, not large, that to belong needs only the common drink, a place to drink it, and a TV. It doesn't even have to be tuned to ESPN or sports of any kind. Men will bond over beer and Scooby-Doo, and in a pinch, they don't even need the beer. Men, with a capital M, believe in their hearts that women are a different creature entirely. It's not absolutely so. Some will gather together within a sorority, some will come together over children. But what bonds women most is the common enemy. Men will trade their enemies casually the way boys once traded baseball cards. It's not the enemy as an individual that raises men's ire so much as the concept. We have our enemy, we have our fight, and the enemy becomes our friend. It doesn't matter who won or lost, it was enough that there was a fight. It is far more rare for the common enemy of women to become friend. And who could be enemy to more than the women at the bunker? Most have asked directly, and outside the confines of the bunker walls, will admit, maybe, to being a waitress. And when the ire of the righteous women is raised, the waitress will try to smother the fire by saying that drunk men tip pretty good, or they might answer that lookin' doesn't hurt. That will not quench the flame, but feed it, for these harlots are stealing the food from the mouths of their babes. To look coldly and scientifically, their fat little kids could stand to miss a meal or two, but attack not the children of the righteous women, nor attack their men, and mention not that their men are about 2 decades too old for the dancers. For it is the fault of the harlots who remove their brassieres for money. So the waitress and dancer bond in defensive sisterhood. Except when a regular is about to open a tab, then the waitress will slit her sister's throat. Many dancers have dabbled in what were called the black arts. If one starts as an untouchable, anything repressed is that much closer, especially if that particular goddess has nothing against dancing or the 1,000 other pleasures of the flesh. When even a small club had 60 or 70 dancers on the roster, unconventional women by any definition, a dozen might profess to be Wiccans. Of course, a few will proclaim to be born-again Christians who want to know if you'll listen to their testimony, but that's another subject entirely. It may be a sign of the times, an overstressed youth, or yet another displaced generation. But there are covens everywhere. Perhaps the powerless are lighting candles and still cursing the darkness. Even before that night, the dressing room casting of spells was not unknown. Why shouldn't young women, beautiful at 100 levels above and below the skin, why shouldn't they believe that if they wished hard enough, prayed hard enough, and confessed, these wishes might come true? Thus the Wiccans bond together as outcasts, even among the outcasts. They are a circle within the circle. But circles have in them the elements of the infinite.
The chrome leg of a crutch peeked past the velvet curtain. The girl at the beer tub must have caught the motion with the corner of her eye as she turned and started to ask, "Can I get you a beer, honey?" She didn't get past you before she stopped, but her plastered-on smile continued as one foot slowly followed the crutch, then the other crutch, and a left foot. The crutches were in the armpits of a body as thin as the steel. Even in the dismal light, his face was grayer than most. When the lights flashed red to yellow to orange and blue, he still looked gray. The red gave him an almost lifelike hue. The blue deepened the gray until his cheeks sank entirely, and he seemed not a skull with skin stretched over, but a skull alone. "You feeling better, Monty?" The beer tub girl pushed her cowboy hat back a little. "You got crutches instead of your chair." "Better painkillers." His legs and crutches moved toward a table beside main stage in the slow, deliberate way a horse grazed across a pasture. He nodded in the professor's direction and continued toward Maine. He didn't see the professor raise his glass. He didn't need to. "He looks like he needs help." The kid stayed with the professor while the ingredients were gathered. He put his hand over hers and shook his head. Let him get to his table, get a couple minutes rest. He detoured toward stage 3, carefully wending his way through the tables and chairs like an elephant picking through dense jungle. His hand came out of his pocket shaking, $2 already folded around his index finger. "He's not that much older than me," the professor explained. "The doctors thought they got it all when his lung came out." Kitty's smile filled her face, and it looked genuine. She put her arms around Monty and spoke to him a little before she started his dance. Her butt slid down his chest. As gently as she pushed, it nearly knocked Monty off his feet. She rose to full height the way a cobra rises from a wicker basket, slowly turning her head over her shoulder, a whisper of a smile on her lips. She used the pole to turn slowly, her hair brushing over his face, first to the left, then to the right. Monty slid his bills into her tea-back, just to the left and right of the valley of her buttocks. "Wow," said the kid, "that's a lot of work for $2. "Sometimes I think that's the only thing that keeps him going." The professor called Skates over and asked her to get Monty a drink as soon as he was ready and to put it on his tab. "The way he looks," the kid's eyes followed Monty as he picked his way from stage 3 to his table next to Maine. "I wouldn't think he'd be able to drink." "Kitty'll drink it for him." He slid her lighter inside the cellophane of her cigarettes. He held up the pack and jiggled it until Kitty gave him a nod. "She'll smoke for him, too." Monty lowered himself into the gray chair and leaned his crutches against main stage. Bianca slid down the brass pole stage right until she lay down. A half-roll brought her to the stage lip, and she used a cocktail napkin to wipe beads of sweat off Monty's face. He thanked her with $1, and Bianca gave her a show to the exclusion of the men too deep at stage left. But hers was a kind of stuttering movement, like her brain and her body couldn't exactly agree on what they would do next. Kitty slipped off 3 half a song early and strutted to the professor's table. She looked up at Sierra on 4 and pointed over her shoulder at Monty. Sierra nodded and mouthed, "Okay." The professor held up the blue dress which he still hadn't seen Kitty in. She stepped into the fabric ring and pulled it over her hips before she slid the straps over her shoulders. The professor held up her cigarettes while she smoothed the dress. He didn't think it was too small, nor too short in his opinion. "You don't mind?" she asked. He shook his head softly. "He reminds me of somebody." "You don't have to explain yourself." "I'll be back." She tapped her second pack before she stepped away. "The minutes will seem like hours," the professor said. Kitty turned back to him, taking a moment to use her middle finger to remove a speck from her eye. "I hate to see you leave, but I love to watch you go," he called loud enough for Kitty to hear. She adjusted the fabric in the small of her back, again with her middle finger. Even so, he liked the color, a kind of iridescent blue that shifted in the light. The kid asked if they were always like that. "More or less," the professor shrugged. Watching the young girl, he thought maybe she was doing better. Her pupils were still pinpoints, but when she moved her head, it wasn't like a spasm. "Y'all play like you're married or something." "Nah, I like her too much." "Have you ever been married?" "A long time ago." "I figure it was about when you were born." "I want to get married. You don't want to get married again?" He smiled, thought children, and wondered when Kitty would return.
Once Kitty returned to the professor, the kid left for the dressing room. Kitty asked him if something was up. The professor, being the professor, didn't return the obvious line, and he hadn't noticed anything out of the ordinary. "I'm cut off for a little while," she said. "Why did you send over a double?" He shook his head because he didn't know anything about a double. He didn't know, nor did Kitty, that the barback had been enlisted for their spell. He asked how Monty was doing. Kitty shook her head and wanted to cry. Instead, she listened for the next song and asked the professor if he'd like a dance. He didn't answer because he didn't need to, just as she really didn't need to ask. More than once she'd told him they were dancing, and he was never sorry she had. Their only rule, written in stone and inviolate, no country. The professor didn't recognize the song, but he'd seen her eyes and it didn't matter. Her hand gently led him toward the couches. She never flinched when the hand in hers bumped the small of her back. She pointed him toward the empty couch against the full wall. It was, after a fashion, the most intimate couch. In the U-shaped arrangement, voyeurs peeking over the low wall were easily dismissed, 8 feet away instead of 6 inches. And at the bottom of the U, she could see or be seen by 3/4 of the tables. He settled into the center cushion, because that was where she directed him. She pushed his knees apart so she could stand between them. His hands were outside his legs. It only took a heartbeat for her to pop the dress over her head. She leaned over the professor, wrapping the dress around his neck like a scarf. When she brought her shoulders in, her breasts touched the sides of his face. Many guys would have turned their head left or right for the chance of a nipple brushing his lips, but the professor stayed stock still, his nose against her breastbone. Kitty had danced hard for Monty, hard enough that when she started sliding down, the tip of the professor's nose drew a line in a light sheen of sweat. With her forehead against his and the tip of her nose against his, she climbed into his lap, her calves on the outside of his legs. Kitty brought his hands against her legs. He tried to talk to her about something, Monty maybe, but Kitty told him to shut up and take your dance. He was smiling when he said, okay, he'd shut up. If she told him to shut up, he'd shut up. He wanted to start her laughing, but Kitty raised and shifted until her breast brushed his chin. That stopped his lips flapping, and for a moment he wasn't looking into her eyes. She pulled her legs back and started drifting toward the floor, her own chin running down his chest and stomach. As she dropped, her hands fell from his shoulders and her fingertips circled his nipples. Her chin rested where his belt buckle would have been, and he was chuckling. She looked into his eyes and didn't stop her fingers. He stopped chuckling, but he didn't stop smiling. He gave a little pinch. Her chin drifted lower and her fingers ran down a xylophone of ribs. He was obviously enjoying her dance, and she gave him a little extra smile. She turned her head and trailed her hair along his leg, turning her body and rising until she stood with her back to him. She played with the elastic of her tea-back, pulling it out to the left, then the right. It didn't reveal anything, but it gave the impression that it did. She eased into the charmed snake swaying, but down until she sat in his lap, still rocking back and forth. Kitty leaned back, her spine arched, the back of her head on his left shoulder. She cupped her breasts and pressed back until the professor's Adam's apple was against her collarbone. He couldn't look anywhere but at her breasts. That was exactly what she wanted. Her nipples were rock hard, even before her thumbs circled her areola. That wasn't something she normally did, even for him. She told him the air conditioning must have come on. He didn't disagree, and she let herself play just a little longer while she slipped lower, her hair trailing down his chest. Kitty arched her neck as far back as she could. She returned his smile and juggled her breasts playfully. He chuckled while she stood and turned to face him. She eased onto the couch and stretched one leg to full length. She even used a finger to turn the professor's head so that he watched while she raised the leg over his shoulder. She turned his head to her crotch until they looked at each other over the length of her torso. She moved up until all she could see was his eyes. She tried to look as lustful as any fantasy. Neither one could keep a straight face once she started bouncing a couple of inches up and down. But their laughter seemed to make it all the more erotic. Kitty knelt straight up against him, his nose between her navel and the top of her tea-bag. Again she held his head so the professor couldn't look anywhere but straight ahead. When she started down again, his breath was strong against her skin. At the bottom of her breastbone, he started that sound. It rippled across her nerve endings. She brought her breasts against him and felt it come out of his cheek and chin bones, slowing her fall. Exactly as if she had timed it to happen that way, the song ended with their foreheads touching as in a tango, both of them smiling and the professor continuing that sound. If he wouldn't tell her his favorite part of the dance, she wouldn't tell him about that. "Thank you," she said. The professor was never comfortable saying, "You're welcome," and saying, "Oh no, thank you," had gotten old quick. He smiled at her as though he couldn't find words, and she didn't remove his hands from her calves. And he wasn't sure if Kitty realized she was playing with his nipples again.
The spell itself wasn't the kind of thing to inspire awe, nor would it have raised the wrath of the righteous. Manhattan, the kid, and Mom knelt around what looked suspiciously like a birthday candle. Their time was short because it would burn away quickly. It was decided that the kid would handle the ingredients, while Mom and Manhattan held the vessels, highball glasses in this case. Mom concentrated on the professor. Her mantra was, "All of your love for her." Manhattan had Kitty. Her mantra was, not surprisingly, "All of your love for him." Before the kid were 2 jiggers of wine, red, 2 jiggers of vanilla extract, the tax seal just broken, 2 jiggers of Dr. Somebody's organic ginger ale, and, because there was some dispute about which would be better, a jigger of Goldschlager and a jigger of Hot Damn. "Your blood is as his." The kid poured a jigger of wine into the glass Manhattan held. Then his blood into Mom's glass. Then the strength of ginger and the vanilla. Just before the birthday candle was a puddle, the kid poured the Goldschlager and the Hot Damn into Kitty's and the professor's drinks, respectively. She called the Hot Damn the fire within Kitty, and the Goldschlager was the professor's own tempering flame. The candle winked out, and the witches proclaimed the spell cast. Mom led them down the hall, protecting the highball glass as though transporting nitroglycerin. At the sight of Mom, the crowd parted. Manhattan followed, then the kid. Manhattan was so intent on the drink she nearly bumped her when Mom stopped at the table. "I need your help." Mom stood over Kitty and the professor. Manhattan and the kid flanked her to left and right. "Sure," the professor motioned for the women to sit, but they didn't. Mom ignored Kitty's sarcastic remark. "The big boss, he thought we needed a signature drink."
Mom had learned that if she was gonna lie, lie big, but plausible, and a signature drink sounded like one of the big boss's ideas. "Would y'all try these?" Kitty and the professor looked at each other incredulously, their bullshit detectors having gone off the scale. "The secret ingredient isn't ipecac or milk of magnesia or something?" asked the professor, before he mentioned a college prank. He didn't mention whether he was victim, perpetrator, or innocent witness. "Nothing like that." Mom put her glass in front of Kitty, and Manhattan put hers before the professor. "And it's not costing me anything?" "Not tonight," Manhattan said, and the kid almost giggled. Kitty shrugged, pushed up the sleeve of the professor's jacket, and picked up her glass. The professor followed suit. The professor held his high, checking the color, a sort of muddy rose. Kitty's looked a little thicker and deeper. Kitty sniffed hers, then his. Each took a mouthful while Mom and the dancers watched. Many more eyes than theirs watched, but theirs were blatantly obvious. Kitty took a second mouthful while the professor scrunched one eye closed. She was about to laugh at him when she realized hers had a kick all its own. "Mother of God!" he shivered. "Is that some kind of nuclear sangria?" It didn't stop him from taking a second mouthful, rolling the liquid on his tongue while he tried to identify the components. "Sangria," Kitty agreed. "It kinda snuck up on me." "No sneakin'," the professor disagreed. "Red wine, that was obvious. Hot damn, I think. Something else." Kitty sniffed and said she smelled vanilla. The professor asked if they were different and picked up Kitty's. She took his and sipped. The eyes of the witches went wide. Kitty agreed with the professor's initial assessment, and once her drink settled in his gut, the professor told them he was pretty sure he'd feel that in the morning. "Goldschlager?" he asked, then answered himself. "Goldschlager." Kitty finished the professor's and he finished hers. "I don't think it'll make this place famous," Kitty said, "but I could see myself sipping on that first one, more wine, less Goldschlager. I could see doing shot specials of that first one, like when they do a special on Jell-O shots. After that A-bomb impact, it's not bad at all. It could probably do without the wine." "Huh." Mom wondered about what would happen with them sharing the drinks. "Well, I'll take it under advisement." Manhattan and the kid followed Mom back to the dressing room. There was a thorough debriefing and analysis, especially regarding the switch of drinks. The kid held that the switch would negate the spell. Manhattan contended that it strengthened the witching and bind them even closer. The symbolic other had not only been consumed, but mixed with the symbolic self. Mom sat back, telling her confidants that this particular spell had been cast long before.
Kitty and the professor both looked to main stage when the DJ announced Jasmine. "I'm surprised," she said. "I thought the kid was still pretty shook up." "Let's ask." He handed Kitty a buck, and they both approached Maine. The kid nodded when Kitty asked if she was okay. She even swirled around so her dress spun over Kitty and the professor's heads. The needs of the spell had calmed her. Truth be told, she was a more accomplished witch than either Manhattan or Mom. That helped her confidence, too. The kid wouldn't let either Kitty or the professor release their dollars until she was out of her dress.
As it was part and parcel of her spells, it was just an extension of the potion. She'd told herself that's all the dancing was, another kind of spell.
There had been a procession of dancers at the professor's table. TJ spent a few minutes there until one of her admirers showed up. The admirer, who wore the look of a lifelong roughneck whose well had finally come in, thanked the professor for keeping his girl company. Manhattan stopped on her way from Maine to 2. She stayed only long enough for a couple of sips of Kitty's Coke and to ask the professor to hold her dress. In reality, she was checking on her magical handiwork. Carly cursed the sharks up one side and down the other, even while she was counting enough 20s to impair a mule's breathing, if not outright suffocate him. I don't really mind a hand so much, but they were fucking pinching. Kitty was less sympathetic than the professor. Dusty and Bunny asked the professor what he knew about copyrights, because there was this guy that wanted to take pictures of them for an internet site. Together, Kitty already knew the answer. They nodded. But tasteful, Dusty added. I'm sure, the professor said with the mildest sarcasm of which he was capable. Please tell me you haven't signed a model release. No, but he offered $500. Bunny added a pause to impress them. Each. The same as 2-3 nights dancing? Kitty said. Then she tried to explain how pictures never go away. She knew girls that knew it firsthand. And just what would their kids' lives be like once their little friends found pictures of Johnny's mommy naked? I don't have kids, Dusty said. But I do. Bunny punched her shoulder. When they started to argue about copyrights, the professor said that it wouldn't matter. That horse would be out of the barn, as their daddies might have said. They could sue, but the damage would be done. They started arguing, and Kitty told them to take their fight to the dressing room. Then there were a few dancers seeking audience. Not for anything big, but the professor still felt like the godfather. That would have made Kitty his consigliere. And it was all capped by a shot special. Headache? The professor asked when they were finally alone, at least as alone as they could be. Tired? Until he'd asked, Kitty hadn't realized she'd scrunched up her brow. A little of both, maybe. Even just that little bit of wine, I guess. And she was tired when she woke up that morning. On an empty stomach, I could order pizza. Not necessary. She turned her back to the professor and slipped out of his jacket. With her chair backed against his, she leaned her chin against her chest and pulled her hair so it fell to the left, exposing her neck. It was all the hint the professor needed. Instead of starting on her neck, his fingertips touched her temples. His touch was light, rotating slowly counterclockwise. She closed her eyes. It took her a while to realize he was whispering that she should relax, his syllables elongated like waves gently lapping the shore of a tropic lagoon, the words rolling down her arms and legs, seeping from the tips of her fingers and toes. Whatever headache was there eased away as his fingers found her release valve. His exhortations to relax seemed to come not through her ears but through her nerves. She could feel the thumbs behind her ears more than the fingers at her temples. Then the thumbs drifted toward the base of her skull, and his fingers stretched along the line of her chin, down and around her neck, his pinkies just touching her shoulders. She slid the dress straps off her shoulders. It seemed forever before he touched where the straps had been. Whatever was in that drink, it multiplied the effect. This was relaxing her differently. Instead of something hovering on the edge of sleep, this held the elements of afterglow. His fingers were just back of her collarbone. His thumbs rotated around and over her blades of her shoulders. She leaned forward until her head hung limp. Lower, she whispered through her hair. Lower, he whispered through her hair. When she nodded, she could hear her hair rasp against his face. Okay. He'd never stopped moving his hands, only ever hard enough to break the tension. She reached behind and unzipped to the bottom. She knew him too well. He would have unzipped her if she'd asked, but not far enough down. Kitty slid her arms out of the straps, holding the dress up with one hand when she leaned over again. It was a kind of modesty she wasn't used to. Yep, she thought. Afterglow. Except it seemed to work backwards from there. His touch was getting more insistent the farther he went, and her muscles less willing to yield. At least, she thought so. He was stretching his fingers, sliding down her ribs, but he'd never reach far enough to brush her breasts. Even so, she found herself making his sound.
She had to catch her breath when he reached the small of her back. His thumbs were either side of her spine, his pinkies at the top of her T-back. His fingers rotated up and his thumbs pressed the line of her pelvis. She stopped herself from asking him to go lower, but she stretched to bring his thumbs back where they had been. That was when she stopped herself entirely, rising quick enough that he trapped his hands between her back and the chair back. Not because she didn't like it, but because if she liked it any more, well, that she wasn't ready for. He was leaned awkwardly forward, but made no move to escape. In fact, he laid his chin on her shoulder. She turned her head so she could tell him how much she liked that. Wow, was all she could manage. From where he was, all the professor could see was the hand still holding her dress up. She purred she'd never let anybody but him touch her ever again. That was when he asked if he could take his hands out of her dress. Not yet. She shifted her butt a scooch, forcing his hands just a little south. She laughed and told him he could zip her up. Again, neither one of them had noticed Manhattan taking a seat across from Kitty. Kitty waited for the inevitable comment. She even asked if Manny had something to say. Me, I'd be too polite to say anything. Before Kitty could say otherwise, Manhattan spoke again. But what I was thinking was that you owe him $20. He didn't think either one of them wanted to see his hairy ass in a tea-bag. Don't be so sure, Manny winked at Kitty before she said she had to go. Now that you're done causing trouble. She nodded and nearly ran so she could tell Mom that the spell was working. Kitty left before the next set was halfway through. That shot had gone through her like a dose of salts, as Grandma used to say.
"Can I ask you something?" Mom said before Kitty was all the way out of the bathroom. Kitty shrugged. "Well, me and Manny were talking a little." Kitty nodded and uh-huhed. "I only asked 'cause you probably know better than either of us." Kitty asked her if there would be a point anytime soon. "We were talking about the professor," Mom said. "He massages my neck and shoulders sometimes. It's not any big deal." Mom told her that Manny hadn't said anything about a massage. She'd seen it before, though. The first half of the sentence was a lie, but not the second. But that wasn't what we were talking about. What we were talking about was going out with marks. But I guess they wouldn't be marks if you were dating them. I thought she was married.
Mom offered that it was more of a general discussion. Way back when I was on stage, I did it, more than once. You? I guess so. I couldn't name a dancer that hadn't, except for the knew-it-from-birth lesbians, but they went after other dancers. When was the last time you went out with a customer? Kitty didn't even have to think. A long, long time ago. How long? I was younger than Manny. Why? Do you want me to talk to one of the girls about that? Is this another mom test? Mom told her it wasn't a test. She wondered if Kitty had sworn off going out with customers. Kitty eyed her suspiciously. The professor? For example? I mean, did the thought ever cross your mind, even for a second? I haven't heard of him asking anybody out. There was Candy. I can't tell you whether she asked him or he asked her. Nobody ever told me that whole story. I don't know the whole story. I probably don't know more of it than anybody else. You know more than me. Kitty prompted before she offered Mom a cigarette. She used Kitty's cigarette to light her own. You should really ask him. She snorted and shook her head. Don't think I haven't tried to edge the conversation that way. He edges the conversation the other way, and you don't even realize he did it. Mom nodded. I tried to talk to him at the time, but... She shook her head. He's the one that everybody can talk to. Always has been. He can't always solve your problem, but he'll listen and he'll try. He's bailed dancers out of jail, waitresses too. I know all that. Tell me about Candy. Not what happened, what was she like? Mom pondered it for a second. It really wasn't her story to tell, but Kitty had spit the bait out once already, and there she was nibbling at it again.
Candy was a couple of inches shorter than you, I guess. Thin like you, but not because she was exercising. I'd swear the girl lived on Cokes and bar snacks. We used to have that garlicky stuff with the bagel chips and pretzels. What else? Lots of piercings, couple of tattoos, not a day over 20, and already a hard luck story. Not that she ever told me her story, but I've seen 'em all. She had tracks on her one arm, but scarred over. One of the tattoos was laid over top of them to hide it. I won't let mainliners on my stage. Scars on the one wrist, but she covered that up better. She had some bruises, black eye that was almost healed, a scar on her lip that was never going to go away. Kitty knew the story by heart. I guess she was lucky the professor was here that first night. He saw something I sure as hell didn't. I've seen lust. I've seen love. That, I don't know, maybe they knew each other in another life. Even so, she was like a dog that had been beat too much. She'd snap at anybody that got close. He was nice to her, the way he is with everybody. She'd snap at him and he'd still tip her on stage. I don't think it had ever occurred to Candy that a guy could be nice without trying to fuck her. And he wouldn't let anybody say anything bad about her, even if it was true. She was fighting it tooth and nail, but every instinct told her to trust him. "I know the feeling," Kitty said. "I'll bet you do," Mom continued. I don't know what he told her first, but I'm sure she was ready to be beat down with it. She never was what you'd call warm to anybody but him, like the way a cat'll pick out one person and not even recognize there's anybody else around. But sometimes whatever it was carried over to when he wasn't around. I guess she was here about a month, and one night she just up and poured her guts out. Didn't dance a set. The professor asked me to skip her. Mom took a drag on the cigarette. Most times she could take or leave the smokes, but this was a story that deserved a cigarette haze. She wanted to thank him, I guess, but the only thing that anybody ever wanted before was to fuck her. I don't know how he told her no, but it only made her devoted to him. You heard about Shakespeare night? It wouldn't have happened except she remembered hearing the professor say something about Shakespeare. You know how he goes on. Shakespeare grasped the entirety of the human experience, the tragedy, the comedy, something for everyone from the basest peasant to the king of all the Britons. That's it. Anyway, Candy, she started reading Shakespeare. She used to spend a lot of time here, even off shift. I think 'cause there was somebody she wanted to avoid. But most days you could find her at the bar with a play in one hand and a dictionary in the other, marking lines and memorizing them. I'll bet you she'd never read a book front to back before. Then she'd drop quotes when she was talking to him, hoping he would test her. Kitty smiled in spite of herself. He was on a pedestal 10 times higher than the one he's got you on. Kitty heard Mom say it. She probably even knew it was true, but she didn't believe it. And she said so. "We're not talking about you," Mom chided her gently. "It was another 2 months, I guess, before Shakespeare night. Candy didn't snap at everybody all the time. She might have even smiled once or twice. This was a long time ago, and even then the professor thought he was too old for her. I know he didn't want her to get hurt. I told her so, and she asked me to convince him otherwise. I was gonna tell him, but it was Shakespeare night." Mom nodded. "That's all I know for sure. That next afternoon he called looking for her. She'd cleaned out her locker before I got his message. She got scared. The way you make her sound, it must have been like, I don't know, I can't imagine. Some people said the professor must have done something. No, Kitty couldn't and wouldn't believe that. That got shouted down pretty quick. Everything from there on out is rumor or rumors or rumors. Somebody said he'd filed a missing persons report. Somebody else said she'd taken his car and the cops had found it somewhere. Another one said they heard there were private detectives nosing around. Another one said she was hooking. Somebody else said she was found with a needle in her arm and a Jane Doe toe tag. Jesus. Me? I say there was a boyfriend, the one who beat her up when she first got here. I'd guess she was still living with him. Assuming what everybody assumes, I bet she was night and day different after the professor. He might not have noticed Shakespeare, but I don't think she could hide that. I don't know what happened to Candy, but leaving the professor's bed is the stump dumbest thing I've ever heard of. Do you think he knows what happened? He never has said. He wasn't back for a long time. I wasn't sure he'd come back. When he did, he kind of drugged the whole place down with him. It took a while, but he eased back toward who we knew, more or less. Anyway, you got the guy everybody can talk to about anything. Who does he go to when he needs to talk? Kitty didn't have an answer for that.
Kitty returned in the same outfit and shoes, a rarity. The professor caught her eye before she reached him. He pointed at a table up against 3. She wasn't sure what he was trying to tell him, but a look at the seated trio told her everything she needed to know. She found Dougie. "Dead man walking." Kitty leaned toward the floor manager's ear. "Which one?" Dougie asked. "Left of 3, up against the aisle." Kitty winked at the professor, not wanting to turn and point. "Roy Orbison?" "The outfit," Kitty chuckled, "not the haircut. Christ, are those leather pants?" She hadn't noticed, but turned to look. "You gotta figure that chafes." Dougie caught Don the bartender's attention and pointed toward the trio before drawing his finger across his throat. Dougie and Don played a kind of charades because he couldn't understand which table was cut off. "Did you notice if they came in like that?" the floor manager asked. "They just walked in. Never saw 'em before." Kitty was almost yelling before Dougie nodded and she returned to the professor. "Good catch." The professor shook his head. "I just saw him first." "I'll bet you last dance he's passed out before last call." "Steep odds for a sucker bet. Now, if you were going to bet he choked on his own vomit..." "You're a cruel man, Professor." She tapped a cigarette out of her pack and waited for him to light a match. "But I think his friends were smoking crystal." "That's amphetamines, right? When I was their age, we didn't smoke uppers. We took a pill, and we were damn glad to have that," they said in unison. "If you want to warn the other girls." Then the professor was out of his seat. Stone sober and 10 years younger, she couldn't have moved that quick, and the professor was less than sober and at least 10 years older. But it wasn't the table with the drunken speed freaks, at least not the same drunken speed freaks. It was the frat boys 2 tables over. "Fight!" The professor's voice carried like a gunshot. He'd grabbed the kid and may have physically lifted her away from the table. 2 college boys rolled up the aisle. One wore a flat top and a TCU sweatshirt, the other looked heavier, but that might have been because of his muscle shirt. 3 of their friends tried to pull them apart. One wore a fraternity sweatshirt, one a button-down Oxford, and the last another TCU sweatshirt. The kid was behind the professor, but he didn't step any closer to the 400 pounds of testosterone and alcohol playing out in front of him. Kitty couldn't get a real good look. The professor kept standing in the way. She really didn't need a good look. Bar fights were all pretty much the same, short little punches while each tried to grab the other. As in a hockey fight, each ended up with a handful of sweater. Unlike a hockey fight, their short little punches went for anything, not just the face. As quick as he'd gone around the table, the professor shot out a hand. Kitty only saw a glint before Mirror on 4 spiderwebbed. The kid stood there, mouth agape. Kitty grabbed her hand and jerked her down. And as quick as the fight started, Dougie and the other floor walkers hustled it out the front door. The music hadn't even paused. "Everybody okay?" The professor's inquiry started with Kitty and skipped to every dancer or waitress in a 10-foot radius. I could see it coming at my head, clear as day. I couldn't tell. The professor asked again if they were okay. They nodded and he sat. "Shot glass! It was coming right from my face!" Kitty waved down skates and ordered a round. She pointed at the professor and he held up 4 fingers before he waved them around the table. He reached over to 4 and picked up the 2-inch shot glass. "I guess that's what broke the mirror," the professor said. The only damage was a chink in its base. "You almost caught it," Kitty said when the drinks arrived. "The 4th is for you," the professor told Skates, "if you want it." "And I need it," she said. The table was starting to get crowded, but a good crowded. "To my hero," the kid raised a toast. "I only did what any red-blooded American would do." "You stood up to protect us," Kitty raised her shooter. "Hear, hear," said Skates. The professor tried to stop them, but the ladies drank to him anyway. "Do you mind if I stay a little while?" Skates asked, apparently of the professor. "Take mine," Kitty offered the chair next to the professor, "but I gotta pick some tunes. But I'll be back." She tapped her sole remaining cigarette pack. He nodded and she rubbed his hair stubble on the way to the dressing room. His eyes followed until she was out of sight. Kitty knew it was him. His eyes felt different. "I scared myself silly." The kid kissed the professor full on the lips. "Apple pucker and cinnamon. Kinda funky. Thanks." The professor chuckled, and the kid tentatively rubbed his head before she left. His eyes didn't follow. "What did I miss?" the waitress asked while she bummed one of Kitty's cigarettes. "Somebody threw a shot glass during the fight." He pointed at the mirror. "It kinda glanced off me instead of whacking the kid in the forehead. Like that would do any damage." "Your words," he lit her cigarette, "not mine." "Tough night all around," Skates said. "Thanks for the shot. I don't usually drink here." "Bad crowd?" He waved out the flaming match. "Fucking napkin boy is here." She shook her head. Her voice didn't sound quite so soft. "Where at?" He stretched his neck and panned the crowd. Napkins floated down, almost like feathers. There had been a certain beauty the first time he'd seen it. "I bet it was funny the first time." The crux of the bit was that the 300-pound-plus bearded man reached onto the waitress's tray, any waitress passing by. He grabbed a handful of napkins and tossed them into the air like confetti. Skates shrugged. "It was never funny. Who does he think has to pick them up? It might even be funny if he only did it once in a night." "Does he at least spend a lot?" She shook her head. "And he's a lousy tipper on top of that. Then he starts getting cute while we're bent over picking them up. Asshole." "Have you told Dougie?" "It doesn't do any good." Her tone was resolved instead of frustrated. "They think 'cause they let me keep the quarter off their beer that's some kind of license to grab my ass." The professor nodded, as though he understood. "That's what we all like about you." The professor wore the same face as on deer caught in headlights. I don't think I understand." "You tip real good and you're not all hands." The professor seemed a bit lost for words. "I don't want to seem impolite." "That's a nice way of putting it." She started picking up the shot glasses, but the professor drank the dregs from all of them. "At 6-something a shot, I'm drinking every drop." "And no one disrespects you for it," she said. "You know, you could send the twins over to Napkin Boy's table." Skate's eyes glittered at the inherent evil of his plot. The twins were statuesque dancers, unrelated but alike enough to be, well, twins. There were many implied fantasies regarding that very point, but the twins were known to the regulars more for their prodigious thirst, a thirst for wine spritzers, Cape Cods, Black Widows, 8-balls, and any other commission drink. A commission drink being, as its name implied, any drink on which a dancer made a commission, $3 to be precise, and the drinks have nary an ounce of alcohol. Waitresses like Skates don't let their regulars, like the professor, get taken advantage of, at least not that way. But the twins can make a decent living off the non-regulars, as long as nobody spilled the beans. It wasn't really the drinks that ticked the regulars off, it was that neither would remove their tops. They'd lower a tube top until it was a belt, or raise an exercise bra until it was wadded in her armpits, but they wouldn't take the extra second to entirely remove the article.
"How's that little baby doing?" The professor changed the subject. "Last I remember, he was walking." "Not walking, running." She opened her change box and spun it around so he could see the picture taped to the lid, and a couple days back, he said something that sounded like Mama. "Wow, he got big fast." Skates nodded. "That picture's probably 3 weeks old." "You know, you just light up when you talk about him," the professor said. When she turned red, he told her that wasn't a bad thing. "I'm thinking about another." 2 in diapers, that'll be hard. "If I was pregnant tomorrow, I was kind of hoping he'd be out of diapers before a sister comes along." "Could be another boy," he said. She shook her head and told him Mom had laid on her hands and said the next one was going to be a girl. It's like she's got the power. He wished her good luck. "You're a doll now, but I remember how beautiful you were last time." Skates blushed right down to her shoes and couldn't look at the professor while she thanked him for the compliment. Looking at it right then, the professor was certain that when Skates was pregnant, every man and woman she met would smile when they saw her. They wouldn't be able to help themselves.
And if it doesn't happen right away, he smiled himself, it's still fun trying. She shrugged, and he remembered the exchange with Kitty. I'd have to quit, not because they'd make me, and you're okay, but the way some guys look at us? I never thought of that, he said. And I need to have medical insurance. I don't guess waitresses get that anywhere. She brushed a stray lock back behind her ear and said that she'd heard about places with unions that did. Not in Texas. I guess I can answer phones or something. I know we'll miss you around here. He added that she was a good waitress, maybe the best the bunker had. Skate smiled and said she'd miss it there. And you won't ever have any trouble getting a waitress. Baby likes coming over, so do most of the girls. Did you know that some of them take their breaks here? Not just dancers either. I shrugged, and he said he enjoyed the company. Kitty waved at them from the DJ's alcove. They both waved back. I was kidding about Kitty when you came in, Skate said. I wouldn't try and take her from you. Everybody keeps saying that. He shook his head. Skates had not been enlisted in the spell, but she knew of it. And she thought she'd help out. Y'all look good together. You like her, don't you? He didn't answer, but Skates poked him with her elbow and told him he should ask her out. The professor didn't answer that either. Skates thanked him for letting her rest her dogs. I gotta go. There are too many waitresses tonight and too many crappy tippers. The professor nodded, and she asked if he needed anything. He shook his head, but took her hand. You know, it's not because I don't want to fondle you. She, too, rubbed his hair. That might be the sweetest thing anyone says to me tonight.
The kid was sitting with the frat boys, who'd made up and couldn't understand that they'd had a brawl, let alone why they'd had one. She'd danced her last set to Santana's Black Magic Woman. It was just as well she wasn't at the professor's table. Her ears would have certainly caught fire when near on midnight Manhattan unleashed a stream of barely muffled obscenity, the likes of which hadn't been used in the bunker since the DJ was enjoined from ever playing gangster rap. As it was, the professor thought as might, and even Kitty was shocked. Not so much by what she heard, but because she could find no reason for it. Both of them sat in gape-mouthed amazement, even after the petite strawberry blonde jumped up from the chair next to Kitty. Kitty was so stunned, she didn't immediately follow her friend to the dressing room. When she did get up, the professor still sat in stunned, yet gratified, astonishment, as though a howitzer shell had landed next to him, obliterating even fragmentary evidence of his platoon, but left him not just alive, but without a scratch. Had Kitty been less stunned, she would have been working on a tirade, and it would have started, "What the fuck was that all about?" Manhattan was pacing the dressing room, still cursing, but Kitty recognized other words amid the profanity being used as nouns, adjectives, verbs, and adverbs. Mom closed the dressing room door behind Kitty while Manhattan mentioned her parents. Quoting exactly, Manhattan said, "My parents, my goddamn son of a bitch motherfucking parents." Mom and Kitty both tried to get her to slow down. They asked her exactly what was it about her parents. "Out there!" She was pointing toward the men's room. They probably thought she pointed toward the floor. "You're sure?" Mom asked. Kitty ran to the DJ's alcove to check. It was somebody's parents. Kitty's description came out as American Gothic, dressed in Sunday go-to-meeting clothes, less the pitchfork. And, "As God is my witness, the guy was holding a Bible." That's Reverend Dobson. It might have been Manhattan's first sentence in 5 minutes that wouldn't have singed the Reverend's eyebrows. "My daddy's the little round guy in the glasses. I don't think him and my mom have spoken but 2 words in 10 years. I am in a world of shit." When she said it, Manhattan looked older than Mom. Kitty had been pretty sure of that as soon as parents were mentioned. "They found out you were dancing." "No shit, Sherlock." That would have normally started a fight, but Kitty deserved it and knew it had been a statement of the obvious. "Did they see you? Can we sneak you out the back?" "I'll bet they know your car," Mom said. "I'll bet they even compared the license plates." Kitty and Manhattan both referred to sexual intercourse. "We could dress you up as a waitress," Kitty suggested. "Who is here that she's about the same size as?" Mom shot that down when she reasoned that they wouldn't bring a minister unless they were absolutely positive there was more to it than waitressing. Manhattan started swearing, but without completing a single curse. She made nonsense sounds as though she'd dropped a cartoon anvil on her foot in front of an audience of preschoolers. "What we got here is an intervention."
Manhattan said if the Reverend was there, they had a fucking exorcism. That made Kitty laugh in spite of the seriousness. Okay, Mom nodded. Okay, they surprised you. Do you think they saw you? Maybe, Manhattan said, but they only ever see me in a ponytail, so they might not have recognized me. Okay, Mom thought. Okay, they got round one. We need to know what we're up against. Figure out how many they got in their corner. Go up to the DJ's booth and check the room. See if you recognize anybody else. They'll see me. Use a compact mirror, Kitty suggested. But before you check, think about who else is probably there. Brothers? Sisters? Brother. But he's in Denton County Jail for a couple months. 3rd DWI. No sisters. Best friend? Ex-husband? Mom asked. Steffi knows I work here, but I never told her dancing. Unless she's dumb as a box of rocks, it occurred to her. Kitty said my family all kind of pretend I'm waitressing. Manhattan thought about it and ruled out her son's father. He'd use that against her to get custody. Then her parents would never again see their only grandchild. She asked if she could still sneak out the back. Mom shook her head and said they probably had somebody watching her car. Kitty asked what they ought to do. Check the crowd, see who else is here, Mom said. I'm going to go get the professor. Manhattan held the mirror at arm's length. Kitty stood behind her but had stretched her neck forward until their ears touched as they both checked the room. Manhattan pointed out her father. He didn't look as out of place as her mother and the Reverend. Anybody else from church? Kitty asked. I haven't been to Sunday church since I was a kid. By the time I get home it's 4, and by the time I get to sleep it's 5. Christ. I wondered if that last part was in reference to anyone in particular, but it seemed to cover the situation in general. Manhattan followed Mom with the mirror. She leaned over and whispered in the professor's ear. His eyes snapped open, and Kitty read his lips to say, "Holy shit." It was so obvious she and Manhattan both chuckled, and Kitty almost heard him saying it. The professor's eyes drifted slowly toward the door, pausing while he held his tonic water to his lips. Damn, he's good, Manhattan said. I'm not seeing anybody. Shit, there's my aunt and my cousin. Like I need this. Once Mom led the professor down the hall, Manhattan snapped the compact shut. She and Kitty met them in the dressing room. The professor looked around. It's not exactly what I imagined back here. How so? I guess I didn't expect it to be so bright. Can we get back to my problem? Sorry, he apologized. I guess I feel like I'm in one of those bad TV shows where a guy gets stuck on the island of Amazons. Carly walking past him toward Maine, and Rainbow coming off didn't stifle his imaginings. Wait, he stopped Rainbow like a cop directing traffic. Ask the girls to tone down their acts a little bit. I mean, Peaches in particular. Rainbow looked at Mom, who nodded. Mom, no couch dances, no table dances for 2 songs. What do you have in mind? I'm not sure yet. He moved thumb and forefinger across his upper lip as though he were stroking a mustache. Shot special. 2-song shot special. The crowd won't even notice there aren't any dances going on. Mom thought it was brilliant. She left to find Dougie. Manhattan asked the professor what he was up to. He said his original plan was to get them drunk, but they didn't have time. Daddy probably, my aunt maybe, not the others. Is there someplace private? This can't be out on the floor. How about here? Kitty suggested. Too much traffic, and naked at that. Manhattan shot that down. Dougie's office? That's next to the cashier? Too small, Kitty said, and it would look like you're afraid to have them on the floor, the professor said. But I need to ask you a question. Shoot. Do you want to stay here? Think about it. It's good money, Manhattan answered without thinking. Kitty nodded too, but she knew where the professor was headed. Would you stay if the money weren't as good? Remember, a guy puked on you today. It took her longer to answer, but yes. I like it here better than any other place I've been. Good, the professor said. They're going to load a pile of shit on you. I can't stop that. But remember what you just said. Is there a storeroom, something like that? Kitty pointed through the wall toward the door next to the men's room. Mom returned. Dougie sure didn't like calling a shot special, and he'd really like to know why the couches are shut off. One problem at a time, Mom. One problem at a time. At least the girls are all behaving. That's a first, Kitty said. While the special's still going, one of y'all need to show them around the bunker. Answer their questions. Talk to the customers. The ones you know are cool. Show them back here. The DJ's booth. Everything. I can do that, Mom said. The professor wondered out loud whether it would be better for Kitty to do it or Mom. I'm assuming you're kind of looking for a distraction? But if Kits does it, it might be too obvious, he said. Dressed like that, she would be, Manhattan offered. Long gown, hostessy kind of thing? Perfect, they all agreed. Mom, can you ride Herd on the room while she's showing them around? She nodded and helped Kitty pick a dress from the collection. Where are you two going to be? Storeroom. When you finish the tour, bring them back there. He turned his back while Kitty stripped to her tea bag and slid into a black velvet gown. After Kitty and Mom left, the professor suggested that Manhattan change into street clothes. That would be one less thing for them to bitch about. Dougie blocked the view while Manhattan and the professor snuck into the storeroom. Beer cases were already stacked as makeshift seating. The door clicked shut and the professor told her he'd been through one of these. Intervener? No, he said. I was the one with the problem. Nose candy. He tried to explain it away by saying it was the 80s. Did it work? Not really. Oh. It was never going to work. He said, I wasn't ready to get clean. But that's a different story. This one won't work either. You're not doing anything wrong. You're kinda say so. No, I'm not. You've been here for 2 years. 4. Really? Huh. So I guess we've known each other for 4 years. I've never seen you do anything wrong. You weren't here every night. Anyway, remember this. All you do is tease. We, and I speak on behalf of all guys, pay you good money to tease us. She asked if that was the extent of his advice, only she didn't say it very nicely. I'm not sure how they're going to play this, but my guess is that they're going to try to make you angry. They're going to try to make you cry. It's working. He pulled his handkerchief from his back pocket. These are people that care about you. It sounds hokey, but they're trying to save your soul. Too late. She wiped her eyes and blew her nose. That shit stops now. He was very firm. If you're damned for this, I'll save you a good spot in hell. In fact, I'll buy you first dance. She was laughing while she was crying. And there are people here that care about you too. She nodded slowly. Whatever we say stays here, right? Usually. Of course, I've never heard of anyone bringing an advisor to their own intervention.
Shit, not that. No matter what I saw or do, it's not over tonight. He had to agree with her there. If they force me to give up dancing, what are they going to force me to give up next? Cigarettes, drinking, sex, drugs, and rock and roll. You still make me laugh. That's pretty cool, she said. What I meant was, anything you hear from them stays here. Of course. And anything I say stays here. You don't tell anybody, not even Kitty. How long have you known me? People keep telling me stuff because I never tell anybody anything. Thank you. She hugged him and didn't let go. There's something else before they get here. Shoot, he said. I need to ask you something about Kits. Because she knocked on the storeroom door, Manhattan never got the chance. The professor opened the door and asked the entourage to come in. He turned to smile reassurance to Manhattan, but the fierceness in her eyes told him she was ready to use their guts for garters. It was a good act. After her mother, father, reverend, aunt, and cousin were seated, Kitty asked if she could do anything. One thing, he whispered. Send skates back here in about 5 minutes. It'll break their concentration, and if some of them drink and the others hate it, I can get them fighting amongst themselves. You are a genius! If only I'd use my genius for niceness instead of evil, he smiled. I am not looking forward to 1 second of this. She needs you. How many times have I heard that today? He asked sarcastically. Kitty waited for a moment, her ear to the door. The professor asked if anyone would like something to drink, his treat. He then said everyone had him at a disadvantage, as they all knew each other, but he only knew one of them. Would they mind very much introducing themselves? Yep, Kitty thought. Pure genius. Or pure bullshit.
Mom and Kitty interrogated Skates when she came out of the storeroom with an order for a Boilermaker, a Royal Fuck, a tequila, 2 Cokes, a Sprite, and a tonic water. The waitress reported that Manny looked like she was ready to burst. She was holding the professor's hand so tight that she swore the dancer was drawing blood. The professor?
She shook her head. It's like he's letting them get away with lying about her. And every time somebody says something, he asks them to, what was his word? Elaborate. Then he'll say something nice and ask Manny to respond. What the hell is he doing? Kitty looked like she'd throw the door open and gun them all down. Mom said it was like one of the times he broke up a bitch fight. But it wasn't even a fight. He stopped it before it started. He's making everybody think about what they're gonna say, especially Manny. I wish he'd been there when my mom found out when I was dancing, Mom said. Of course, he'd have only been about 15 then. Skates told them she really had to go get the drinks. Then Dougie came by for a report. Then each dancer as she made her way to or from Maine. During one of the few lulls, Mom told Kitty she wore the evening gown well. Real elegant, she said. Like you're going to one of those charity dinners with the mayor, those kind of people. You think? Kitty said before she dismissed the idea. I kind of like the way it catches the light. It really doesn't seem like a dress for here. A moment of weakness. There was somebody else I pictured wearing it, but you can take it if you like. How much? Take it. It's just been hanging on the rack waiting for somebody to come along. Kitty said she couldn't even while she turned to catch how it looked in profile. Kitty didn't notice, but at just that moment, Mom smiled her own evil genius grin. There was another half hour of intervention. They heard the professor loudly asking everyone to remain civil. He even thanked them when it quieted down. He opened the door and nearly knocked Kitty and Mom off their feet. If you'd rather not go into the main room, I'm sure Kitty would show you to another exit. Manhattan's mother, her aunt, and the Reverend appreciated his courtesy. Her dad and her cousin looked as though they'd just as soon get a table and a couple of shots. You mind what we said? Her mother gave Manhattan the stern look. I'll make sure that she does, the professor said. Some excellent points were made. He smiled and shook hands. Kitty showed them the back door as though they'd won the big prize, not the rice and roni behind door number 2. He gave a little wave before the door closed. He proclaimed them the most self-righteous bastards he'd ever had the displeasure of speaking to. No, Manhattan told him, some of what they said was true. Both Kitty and Mom asked if she was okay. She was slumped on top of the seat of beer cases, but nodded that she was. I don't think I can dance anymore tonight. Mom dismissed the possibility because Manhattan's shift had ended at midnight. The professor excused himself, saying he needed a drink and he needed to pee, but probably not in that order. Manhattan stopped the professor, hugged him as hard and for as long as she could before she thanked him, her voice cracking. She rubbed his head and sent him on his way before Kitty and Mom led her back to the dressing room. She cried about all the bad things they'd said about her and all the nice things the professor had defended her with.
Kitty didn't bother to change out of the evening gown. While she was walking back to his table, the professor tossed back one shot, and there were still 2 on the table. All for you? 2 for me, 1 for you. He explained that because he outweighed her by 50 pounds, he should drink 3 to her every 2. You're not a professional, she said. Mom said your tab has already been paid for. Why? Because you did a kind and honorable thing. She held up her shot and waited for him to raise his. That's what we're drinking to? She nodded, he shrugged, and they drank. Manhattan's not picking it up, is she? His voice was rough with an alcohol spasm. Nope. Mom? The house. Dougie said you kept a good dancer here and there was no fight. And the midnight shot special was so profitable, it may become an evening staple. He might even name it after you, the Professor's Shot Special. He chuckled and told her to make sure that was engraved on his tombstone. No kidding, Manny really appreciates what she did. Her exact words were, God damn it, Kitty, if you don't take him, all will rock his fucking world. She's been a friend for a long time. There isn't another guy here who could have done it. You know how weird it is for us to really talk to you, to really be friends with a dancer? Kitty noticed a slight dullness to her speech and noted how hard it was to keep her eyes fully open. Why are you so different? Different how? He answered. From who? From whom? She corrected, but she thought he should have known that. You never bitch about an ex-wife or girlfriend. You never complain about anything. I'll bet you're smarter than any guy that ever walked through that door. Anybody paying $5 for a beer can't be that bright. You're trying to change the subject. Yep, she'd had half of one more than she ought to.
The difference was, she knew it. You change the subject, but you always know what you're talking about. That's where you're mistaken, he held up his finger. You forgot the 1,000 times I didn't say a damned thing. That's where you're mistaken, she imitated his tone and gestures. That drug a whole-face smile out of the professor. You've got a beautiful smile. Why don't you smile more? I could ask the same question of you. Kitty wasn't sure of her answer. We were talking about you. Don't change the subject. That's where you're mistaken, they spoke and gestured together. They laughed so hard each had to lay their head on the other's shoulder. After a few moments, they weren't laughing anymore, but their heads hadn't moved. For a long moment, there wasn't overloud rock music. There wasn't a crowd speaking over the music. There wasn't a crowd or a bar. She could hear the pulse through his neck. She could feel his breath falling down her shoulder. They might be alone on a desert island for a long moment. And another. And there would have been another, but Kitty caught herself even while her fingers caressed his neck. She didn't know what to say, but whispered again that he had a beautiful smile. She lifted her head and her lips past his ears. His barest beard stubble brushed her cheek. Even while she tried to stop, it was too easy to lay her forehead on his. The professor looked a little sleepy-eyed himself. Of course, that might be because her eyes were close enough to his that she might as well blink for him too. Kitty closed her eyes and waited. She knew she was waiting for something, but she still didn't know how she'd react. If she moved at all, their lips would touch. If he moved at all, his breath touched her lips, warm, soft, and cinnamon. It had been so easy. Why was this so hard? Maybe she'd gone too far. Her head told her she had. Her body told her she hadn't gone far enough. She could blame the alcohol if she had to, for him and for her, but she didn't know if the blame would start in a minute, or the morning, or at all. Shh. She put her fingertips on his lips. There was more substance to his lips than she had imagined. Why did he have to say anything? He was breathing through her fingers, and she could feel a stutter to it. It didn't take any imagination to feel him kissing her fingers, and it took less to feel her fingers tracing those lips. I am up. She didn't want to leave. He looked like he was waiting for her to open her eyes. I know. She rolled her forehead off his head, drawing her nose between his eyebrows and up, her bottom lip dragging. She stopped when her lips were against the center of his forehead and his chin was in her cleavage. She still didn't want to leave. Her forearms bracketed his face. Her breath was fogging the shine off his scalp, and her fingernails were tracing the muscles of his neck. I gotta go. His breath was still stuttering. She felt it against her breastbone. Even with her eyes closed, she knew his were closed too. If his fingertips touched her waist, wrapped the points of her hips, she would stay right there forever. But Kitty didn't give him enough chance, stepping back toward the hall with a languorous stride. Damn! She wanted to turn right around.
No, Mom blocked her way to the stage. Don't do your set. Kitty asked why. 'Cause it's 1:30 now. That'll put you on 3 or 4 when the lights come up. Kitty didn't understand and said so. I want you to go talk to the professor. Why? What happened? Mom had been pretty sure before, but with the tone of Kitty's voice, now she was positive. What happened? That's what I should be asking you. Kitty shook her head, again not understanding. You almost kissed him. I don't know why you didn't. I've kissed him before. On the cheek. You were headed toward a full-fledged tonsil hockey lip lock, Mom said. And though it does my old heart good, from what I saw out there in the crowd, I'm almost afraid to imagine what would have happened behind locked doors. You like him, don't you? Everybody likes the professor. Mom chuckled and said they were both too old for games. You like him, don't you? Kitty didn't say it, but she nodded. He likes you too, you know. You asked? A blind man could see it with his cane. He was ready to kiss you. If it had been anywhere but here, he would have. Kitty stuttered and stammered as though she would protest, but Mom stopped her. I don't as a rule meddle in folks' business, but I never saw two people more in need of a kick in the pants.
This raised Kitty's hackles, which made Mom chuckle aloud. "I wouldn't do this if I didn't like you, both of you." Of course, a couple more margaritas and an active spell enhanced her generosity. "I want you to wipe off that makeup, change into street clothes, and go out there to have a cup of coffee with him. Now, I'm going to make sure he stays." Kitty's bag was already on the bench, unzipped. She started to argue, but Mom gave her a look and waved her finger. She set Kitty down on the bench and started out the door. "Oh," Mom poked her head back through the door. "If you were thinking of sneaking out, I took your keys." It didn't take but a minute for Manhattan to run in, the kid trailing her like a little lost puppy. "Girl, there was fire coming off you too." She held Kitty's hair out of her face while she scrubbed off makeup that in full light looked garish. "Please don't start." "Me? I'm not starting anything." Manhattan wasn't sure she'd ever seen Kitty without makeup. "Kid, go into Kitty's bag and let's see what kind of outfit we can make." "This is a bad idea." "God damn you!" Manhattan's voice was vicious. Kitty was ready to fight her. Manhattan asked her if she thought that kind of shit happened every day. Before Kitty could ask what she meant, her friend told her magic was in the air, and it was all for Kitty and the professor. The kid thought Manhattan was telling her about the spell, but she knew you never told the object about a love spell. Then she realized the dancer was talking about magic with a little m. Manhattan dared Kitty to find a fault in the professor. "And he's got a big old blind spot for you too. What the hell are you afraid of?" Kitty told her again it was a bad idea, but her statement lacked any certainty. "It's the best idea." She handed Kitty paper towels. After Kitty wiped the soap and water from her face, they both looked at her in the mirror. The diamond-hard facade wasn't gone, but there was something else underneath it. "We haven't got time to do anything much to your hair. Run a brush through it and soften it a little. Put it up, maybe. With that gown, it would be killer. What do you think, kid?" "The gown is too much. That's like for a fancy night with limousines and champagne. I say some kind of cowgirl thing." "No, I'm no cowgirl. But she's on the right track. Small town country, got a sitter for the kids, meeting your honey for dinner, restaurant on the lake, Saturday night casual." Manhattan let herself run wild. "Work with me, kid." The kid reported that all she could find was t-shirts and sweatpants. "Won't do," Manhattan said. Kitty tried to protest, but her friend sat her down from the makeup mirror. "Real soft lipstick, maybe just gloss, not too much mascara, no pencil but a little shadow," Manhattan recited her version of the makeover. "I'm thinking camisole and jeans." "Capris?" the kid asked. "I got some denim ones." Manhattan announced it the perfect combination, but the kid to pants wouldn't fit Kitty right. Mom returned and was appraised of the situation. "I like a blouse with capris. I mean, she got the right lines for a camisole, but that would look a little slutty. I mean, she's a woman, not a girl. If her hair was shorter, we could go for that Laura Petrie look." Only Kitty knew what she was talking about. Even though she hadn't completely surrendered, she suggested a polo shirt and capris. Mom accepted the suggestion and sent Manhattan and the kid onto the floor to find who had articles of the right size. Even while Kitty was protesting to Mom, she kinda hoped they found the shirt and pants.
Their coffee arrived just as Kitty reached the table, wearing capris and the short-sleeved blouse Carly had worn. It worked better than any of the available polo shirts. "I haven't even hardly got a buzz anymore, and Mom took my keys." She noticed that the professor stood while she sat. "She took mine too," said the professor. "Mom lied and told him that Kitty was cut off, and would he mind not drinking while she sobered up. Kitty told him she'd seen him lots drunker than this." "Yes, you have," he agreed, and stirred the blue packet of sweetener into his coffee before he fought with the lid of a thimble full of creamer. They sipped their coffee while the DJ announced the first call for last call. They'd been watching the crowd the way they usually did. The professor leaned toward her and told her he liked it. "What?" "The look." He motioned his hand to cover her top to bottom. "I like it." Her flats contrasted with his boots, but they finally seemed to be on equal terms as to height. She didn't know if he saw the difference in her makeup. She'd gone with the gloss, and her advisors had allowed a touch of rouge. When she asked him what he liked about it, he couldn't really answer.
Eventually, he said maybe because he'd never expected to see her like that. She blushed as though like that meant naked instead of clothed. The second call for last call was announced. "I'm not used to letting last call go by," the professor said. "Me either." Kitty wondered how to attack it. Silences had never been awkward before. Head-on seemed the best way. "You know we're being set up." He nodded. "I didn't ask anybody to." "Neither did I." He told her he didn't think that was her style. "If you want to go, I'll get Mom to give you your keys back." He shook his head, and there was another silence, less awkward. "My real name is Kate." She held out her hand. "Plain Kate and Bonnie Kate and sometimes Kate the Cursed, but Kate, the prettiest Kate in Christendom," he quoted. Shakespeare? Coincidence. Then why does it seem so contrived? And the professor told her his real name. "I knew it already," she said. "I recognized it." He looked surprised and said there wasn't any reason to recognize it. "You're a bad liar." She told him she'd read his book. He asked her how long she'd known. "For sure? A while back you passed around your wallet showing pictures of your puppy. I saw your Writers Guild card. Your name was on it."
He thanked her for not saying anything. "I figured you'd say something if you wanted anybody to know." He asked her if they were really cut off because he could sure use a drink. She waved down skates and ordered 2 whiskeys neat and bring 'em quick. "This one's on me." She poured the shots into their coffees. "I don't think I've ever bought you a drink." The waitress counted Kitty's change and wished her good luck. Skates winked at the professor. Kate shook her head softly. "Everybody knows, don't they?" She nodded, and he nodded with her. It didn't seem to bother either of them nearly as much as it should have. "So, what do we drink to?" Nothing came to mind, and she said so, but her mug was raised. They'd had many drinks without toasts, but now the pressure was on. "Real names?" She thought about it and nodded. "Real names, but you can still call me Kits. I kind of like it. Can I still call you Professor?" He told her she could call him anything but late for dinner. The first notes of God Bless Texas played, and the DJ announced that it was an all-dance, all-ladies to the stages for the last song of the night. She started to go, but remembered her outfit. "Old habits," she said. "Do you hate that song as much as I do?" "More," he answered. "It takes you away, and our table feels all lonely." "You are a silver-tongued devil." She settled her chin into her palm. The back of her hand concealed half her mouth, but the other half was smiling while she looked at him. It was a contented smile that the professor wasn't accustomed to, but it matched his own. The patrons had already started the clear-out. They stood and finished their beers, be it dregs or 3/4 full. They found unsteady legs beneath them and took small steps toward the door. Their eyes turned toward the girls. The lights were slowly coming up, revealing the surroundings for what they were instead of what was imagined. The painted cow skulls looked cheesier in full light than half. The music faded away and the DJ called for the guys to clear out. He asked for all the dancers to report to the dressing room, and he thanked them all for coming to the bunker. "I guess I gotta go," the professor slipped into his motorcycle jacket. He'd started to add to that when the DJ announced that Kitty and the professor should stay right where they goddamned were. "You were saying?" "Well," the professor settled back into the chair, "if they're not gonna make me leave, I'll stay right here. I'd like that." It surprised him when she said it, and it surprised her that she meant it. When her foot brushed his leg, she didn't jerk away, and he didn't either. She eased a shoe off her heel, dangling the flat from her toes, daring it to fall away by accident. They both tried to hide while the straggling patrons walked toward the door, and the straggling dancers strutted past on their way toward the dressing room. The dancers ran their nails over the professor's shoulders, and over Kate's too. but neither one was nearly as embarrassed as they thought they should be. Only a baker's dozen were scattered around the main room, waitresses pushing chairs under tables and dumping ashtrays, managers riding drogue on the patrons, a few guys waiting for girlfriends and wives. The kid left with her boyfriend, sure that the spell had worked. Mom ran Manhattan off, telling the dancer she'd had enough excitement for one day. Manhattan only left once Mom promised she'd relay all the details. The screen for the TV slowly rolled back toward the ceiling. The 3 lenses projected black and the letters OUX in white onto the gray wall. Dougie excused himself to Kitty and the professor while he reached up and turned the TV off. The professor was sipping his coffee when she asked why he'd only written the one book. He sipped long enough to be a time-buying gulp before he set his mug on the napkin coaster. "I'd take a little explaining," he finally said. "It looks like we've got the time." He took so long to answer that she told him he didn't have to tell her, she didn't mean to pry. "You're not prying." He hesitated again before he said, "It wasn't exactly my shining moment." "Poor dear." She put her hand over his. Poor dear." He looked at her oddly, then he remembered Harvey. "I'd like to think I was more like Jimmy Stewart. He was the one drunk all the time." "You're trying to change the subject." "Not really. He said that in this world you had to be oh so clever or oh so pleasant. He'd been clever, but he recommended pleasant." "How long were you oh so clever?" "Too long. I had an agent for my novel before I was out of college. Important critics were calling it the guidebook to a generation. I read it, I thought the same thing. It was my own self-absorbed depression set to words." There was venom in his tone. "How old were you when you read it?" She shrugged and said 20, she guessed. "The first time. I read it again after I knew who you were." "You were what, 26? No, 29. Okay, 30. He looked at her, but she could tell he didn't know right words. "And did you figure out that I was a pompous ass?" "I wouldn't say that. I thought I was so damned smart, like I was the first person to ever feel, and I thought writing purged all that crap." The professor was slowly turning the spoon in his coffee, watching the wake it left. All it really did was till it under. Then came paperback rights, the movie deal. They made a movie, I don't remember it. That was just another one of my problems. 6 movie deals. The producers would contract with me for a screenplay. They'd use that screenplay to get a director. He'd want me to rewrite it. Add a little here, take a little there. I'd rip out my guts, thumbtack them on the wall, try and figure them out again. Like, what's that, a soothsayer? Beware the Ides of March? More Shakespeare. Remind me and I'll tell you about that too. You don't have to. I mean, I'll understand if you don't. It's not like it's a big secret, he shrugged, but don't ask until I've got a couple of drinks in me. At least then I can pretend that I'm drunk. Drunk or sober, you're among friends. He smiled and told her that might be the one thing in life he'd never doubted. But I know how mad you get when I change the subject. What was the subject? Books and movies, I think. Soothsayer, I remember now. All the time, I'd be reshaping a character that was basically me to suit the vision of the director. Then the whole process started over. 15, 20 rewrites. I might have been the author of the guidebook to a self-absorbed generation, but as a screenwriter, I was on the lowest rung on the Hollywood ladder. It spoke to me. But he went on as though he hadn't heard her. I kept rearranging my neurosis until the character on paper started rewriting who I was. That was about the time my character found coke. My wife left. That took about 75% of the money. I don't begrudge her, not now. She more or less supported me in college. If you read it, you know why the book was hard on the marriage. The movie crucified it. The coke just sucked out the last few drops of blood. Sorry. I'm just glad there weren't kids involved. Kate didn't think he heard her voice. I don't even remember what the straw was that broke the camel's back, but I didn't let them renew the option. That pissed a few people off. It had been 5 years since I wrote anything but scripts. Too many permutations of the same couple of characters. I couldn't write, and when I couldn't write, I needed more coke. I guess you'd call it a nervous breakdown. Not a big furniture-smashing breakdown, nothing that would have shown up on E.T., Just a quivering, sobbing mess. I finally got clean for good about the time you read it for the first time. Now she didn't have any words that were right. I spent a lot of time wondering. Charles Kuralt without the TV cameras. Maybe it was the Kerouac on the road thing. Why? I started to learn about people. Buy them a cup of coffee, share a beer, waved at our glasses, a shot. And they'll tell you their stories. Kitty nodded. I guess I knew that. The guys in here just want to have somebody hear their story. He nodded, but dancers and waitresses have stories too. I finally learned how to write. I was cursed with being successful before I was competent. That took almost 10 years. So why couldn't I find another book you wrote? I'm not writing under my name. Too much baggage, professional and otherwise. That first book under my pen name made me feel better than the guidebook to a generation. It didn't make much, but I could enjoy it. Would I have heard of your books? Seen any movies? The professor smiled. Probably not a movie. They're still pissed. Anyway, it stopped being my book as soon as I changed the characters to suit somebody else. I've ghosted a couple of books written from movie scripts. The spec work is what pays the bills, but I got one of my own excerpted for Reader's Digest. Not bad for a hack. A dog story. The one where the guy falls off the horse and dies? How'd you know that? Seems like you, I guess, and it's the only dog story I remember except for, Call of the Wild. The professor shrugged. The book really doesn't have much to do with the dog, but it was the only chapter that more or less stood on its own. Did you read the book? I meant to. I'll get you a copy if you want. She said she'd run down to Barnes & Noble and buy it. He told her not to. I'd only net 30 cents of the $6.50. It's probably my favorite whole book. There are scenes in others that I like better, but as a whole book, it's my favorite. Reader's Digest wanted to publish that chapter with my real name, figured it might sell a few more copies. My agent sure wishes I had. So why keep the pen name? My publisher kind of likes having my only book as the guidebook to a generation. They can pretend I'm Salinger. Besides, my generation has gotten fat, bald, and high cholesterol. Who wants to read about that? Kitty told the professor again that she didn't understand him. I don't either, he smiled, and sipped.
They weren't talking about much of anything. She tried to get him to talk about his books, and he tried to get her to tell him something about herself, where she went to high school, anything. But he dodged her and she dodged him, more out of habit than any other reason. Their coffee drained away sip by sip. They dodged a little less or avoided the things each needed to dodge. 15 minutes past closing became 30, then 45. I hadn't noticed the music, said the professor. Kate had. It had more or less started with Melt for You, then Addicted to Love, drifting through half a dozen of what passed for love songs in the 80s. And Kate nearly freaked out when Elton John came over the speakers with Tiny Dancer. Maybe the professor hadn't noticed. Mom was going overboard with Percy Sledge, but at least she hadn't played any of those stupid songs she was always hearing at wedding receptions. Then she leaned in close. I'm thinking of Lady and the Tramp. He looked confused. It's been a long time. He leaned in too. Whatever she was wearing, it smelled faintly of apples. She said, there was a song when they were out back of the Italian restaurant. He rolled the meatball with his nose. She was half humming, half singing the words, Oh, this is the night, it's a beautiful night, and we call it Bella Notte. She stopped when she started listening to her words. They kissed when they were eating the spaghetti strand. She's seen the video 100 times, but could watch it over and over. I guess that means Mom's back there playing the accordion. You have beautiful eyes, he said. He must have been able to feel the heat from her blush. Thank you. Her voice wasn't even loud enough for a whisper. He asked her not to look away. She raised her eyes and started to say something. Then he started to say something, but they really didn't have anything to talk about. Their eyes didn't look away, but played across, memorizing the way he blinked, the tip of her nose, the exact shape of her lips, the way his earlobes met his face, the earrings she wore, a shaving cut. All of it very important, and from a distance where the breath she exhaled is the one he inhaled. Could you walk me to my car? He was going to say that it would be his pleasure, but all he could manage was, "Okay, we can go out the back." She led him toward the hall, holding his hand with a hand behind her back, as though she were taking him to the couches. "I gotta make a pit stop." "Me too," she said. "Coffee and alcohol." He watched her walking toward the dressing room. She caught him watching. As soon as she turned the corner, the professor climbed with a grunt onto main stage. "Mom saw y'all coming and skedaddled into the back," said the DJ. "Well, give her this." He handed the DJ a 20. "And here's one for you, if for no other reason than because you didn't spin any Barry White. Next on the playlist, then the Love Unlimited Orchestra. Thought I'd end the evening with Stairway. I'm sure you had better places to be." "I figure it's good karma," the DJ shrugged and stuffed the bill into his pocket. While the professor was climbing off the stage, the DJ poked his head out the pass-through and wished him good luck. On his way down the hall, the professor hit the restroom. He wasn't kidding about the pit stop.
Neither was Kate, but she had Mom interrogating her while she did her business. "So," Mom asked while Kate washed her hands. "So what?" "Don't play like we're in high school," Mom said. "So." "He hasn't asked me to spend the night." "That doesn't seem like him. But does he want to? Do you want him to?" "Maybe," she answered both questions, "but that's going to be between us, no matter how much anybody tries to help." "You're both adults," Mom smiled, "but y'all are like a couple of porcupines afraid of getting a snoot full of stickers." Kate started to argue, but Mom waved a finger. "Up there with the DJ, I had a front row seat. I saw your dance for him, and I've never seen better. I saw him massage you, and you can't tell me his hands were where you wanted them. I saw you almost kiss him. I saw you two talking. He's gun-shy, and you like him too much to force it. If he doesn't work up the nerve, you'll have to." When Kate tried to speak, Mom hushed her. "You ain't the first girl here to show an interest in him, but we're all real protective of the professor. You haven't seen the difference in him we have. Ain't a one of us would have helped this along if we didn't know you two were good for each other." Mom handed Kate her gym bag and a stick of gum, just in case. Then Mom led her toward the dressing room door. The professor was waiting, and Kate handed him her bag. He had gum too.
The night had cleared, the moon was a few hands off the horizon, as close to full as it could be without actually being full. Whatever front had brought the storms, behind it was clear as a bell. There was hardly any wind, and it was still warm, with another 3 or 4 hours to cool off before climbing into the muggy 80s again on an early fall day. "Good thing the rain stopped," Kate said. "Can't be any fun riding in the rain." "It kind of piques your concentration," he said, "but there's not much I like more than watching storms from the back porch. They never got good lightning storms in Los Angeles." "There are worse reasons for coming home," she said. The professor held the bag open while she fished out the keys for her truck. "It's the little things you miss. I knew I was home once I heard there was a tornado watch." "In Palo Pinto County?" He smiled and nodded. Her keys were attached to clear lucite the size of a note card, a child's drawing sandwiched inside, brown crayon for hair, peach skin, and maroon lips. When she thought he'd noticed, Kate told him her daughter drew it. He didn't have to ask if it was a picture of Mommy. She unlocked the passenger side door. She took the bag from the professor and tossed it into the footwell. The keys she stuffed in her pocket, lucite dangling. "Oh, Mom gave me your keys. Don't tell her, but I always had a second set." Kate unlocked the driver's side door, but hadn't yet opened it. Instead, she leaned against the sheet metal and looked up at the stars and the moths circling the security lights. "I guess you gotta go home to your kid." "Yeah," but she made no move toward opening the door. They were both waiting. Now it was the professor's turn to look at the moths slamming the lights and falling to the ground. Their wings beat, but the stunned insects didn't rise off the pavement. "I'd, really like to see you, away from here, I mean. Dinner, maybe?" "I'd like that, but nothing too fancy."
My top hat and tails are at the cleaners anyway, he tried to joke. They were both still looking at the sky. I guess you're working tomorrow? No, tomorrow's good. I already got a sitter. He'd brightened such that the moths might start circling him. She opened the truck door and climbed across to reach the glove compartment. She climbed back down, said pen, and started to climb back up. The professor told her he had a pen, paper too. Never know when I'll get an idea. She wrote her number in his notepad. Call me in the afternoon, we'll figure it out. He nodded when she returned his pad. His lips moved while he memorized the phone number. Then he helped her up into the truck. Kate closed the door and rolled down the window before she started the truck. Van Morrison was on the radio. I'll see you tomorrow. I guess it's really tonight. He nodded again. Then Kate stuck her head out the window, put her hand around the back of his neck and pulled him close enough to kiss. On the lips, not hard, but not soft either. She peeked, and his eyes were closed. I'll see you tonight. She backed out before he could say anything, backed out quick enough that she nearly clipped him with her mirror.
The gray strip of concrete interstate had long since been exchanged for gray-black asphalt. Dawn hadn't quite started to tint the horizon. The only color was a staccato of yellow lane divider, too far out for highway dots. Just as well. She didn't need to be driving by Braille between the rumble strip on the right and city titties on the left. More than once, she'd driven the last few turns in her sleep, finding the truck in the yard and her first clear memory being 15 minutes or a half an hour back. A forgotten cigarette burned in the ashtray like a stick of incense, tobacco instead of vanilla scents. She hadn't really needed one. The radio was forgotten too, voices that rose and fell as she crested hills and dipped into hollows. It was so late she'd only had to dim the high beams once for an oncoming pickup. He'd dimmed his too, only one of his low beams worked. Kate punched the headlight switch when she turned from the asphalt onto the drive, following the gravel as much by the crunching under the tires as by sight. A shift to neutral, a turn of the key, and the truck was silent except for the crunching. The brakes squeaked quieter than a church mouse and stopped the truck beside the shed. She laid her forehead against the steering wheel for a moment and finally let out a long breath. It seemed like forever before she could pull a breath in. There were no lights on, not even the porch light. The horizon was purple-red, and dew slicked the grass. She pulled the handle on the screen door, holding it open with her foot while she searched for house keys. It took a couple of tries to find the right combination of key and keyhole, but she didn't have to resort to bending down until her eye was level with the lock. Her fingertips slid along the counter, finding an open spot for her bag and letting Kate place herself within a mental map of the kitchen. She could have reached up and flipped the light switch, but she didn't need it. Her nails left the counter and skimmed the wallpaper, skipping over the peeling flap, dropping a few inches for the picture frame and raising a few inches over the phone. She didn't open the bedroom door, but her slow walk became a crawl, ears peeled for the smallest sound from the other side. The tips of her nails scratched across the ivory white paint, lifting only when she couldn't touch and still move forward. She only turned the bathroom light on once the door was closed. The hot water didn't moan the way it usually did. It just rattled a little while she picked up combs and mechanically lifted the hair out of her face, left and right, until there was enough of her locks to keep them from moving back or falling forward. She dipped her fingers into the half-empty jar of Noxema. The cold cream drifted across her cheek, a menthol-white layer between skin of finger and skin of face. Down it slid, across her chin to skip from one side of her face to the other, then up her temple and over her forehead, returning to the starting point. The fingertips of both hands spread what was left over her nose and upper lip. A glob from her left cheek went to cover each eyelid, closed tight. Even so, the harsh vapor seeped through and burned. The first few handfuls of water didn't carry off the cream, only dilute it a little, but she could finally feel the warmth. Kate used the edges of her palms like squeegees, scraping most of the Noxema from her skin, carrying away what little makeup was left. A half-dozen splashes of warm water opened her pores and diluted the smoke that had seeped under her skin.
She cupped more water and rubbed until her hands were empty. For the first time in a long time, the white cotton towel wasn't streaked with mascara and shadow and lipstick. She debated changing into a nightshirt and decided against it. Hardly any night left. Kate did kick off her shoes. The canvas flats landed more or less in the corner next to the tub. The tile felt cool under her bare feet. The bare wood floor was warmer. She headed back toward the kitchen for the ritual cigarette and cup of coffee, but decided she didn't want either one. She opened the bedroom door, slowly so that it didn't squeak. The blanket was wadded up at the bottom of the bed. Grandma had put it over the child, and the child had kicked the blanket off. That was a battle Grandma fought. Kate picked her fights more judiciously. It didn't take much shifting of the child's limbs before Kate could crawl in with her. Her daughter stirred and asked if Mommy had a bad day at the bar again. No, baby. She kissed the back of her toddler daughter's head. Mommy had a good day. Even though she didn't think she was tired, Kate fell asleep quickly, not even stirring when Grandma called the child to breakfast. When Kate did wake up, she didn't wake up tired.
One Song Sets, 2013, Steve Gillo. This work is licensed under the Creative Commons Attribution, Non-Commercial, No Derivatives 3.0 United States license. To view a copy of this license, visit http://by-licenses/by-by-by-by-by-by-by-by-by-by-by-by-by-by-by-by-by-by-by-by-by-US or send a letter to Creative Commons 444 Castro Street, Suite 900, Mountain View, California 94041, USA.